The rain comes first. Not the soft kind, but the kind that stains stone heavy, deliberate, like time marking its claim. Then comes the sound. Horses on wet cobblestone, the hiss of lamps being lit, the city holding its breath beneath a veil of smoke. Somewhere beyond the palace gates, London turns in its sleep, dreaming of empires and ghosts. It is the dawn of the Victorian age, the empire's pulse quickening under velvet and iron. The girl they will call Queen has not yet learned to smile without trembling, but soon her face will hang in every parlour, her mourning will darken half the world, and her name will define a century. Behind the lace and ceremony, the world will rise and rot in equal measure: railways, revolutions, and the relentless hum of progress paid for in soot and sorrow. They said she ruled with duty, they said she ruled with grace, but duty is a chain, and grace is a mask. Power sits cold on the skin, and even crowns grow heavy in the dark. So tonight, listen to the rain against the glass and the echo of footsteps fading down marble halls, because this is where it began: Queen Victoria, the queen who defined an age, when one woman's silence became the sound of an empire. Subscribe and stay with me. There are more ghosts to uncover, more histories to haunt, and more nights that never end. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? The past is closer than it seems. The rain comes first. It moves across London like a grey sheet being drawn over a restless child. The gas lamps flicker in the mist, and the streets below Kensington Palace run dark with carriage water and soot. The air smells of wet iron and old roses, the kind that cling to stone walls long after the gardeners have gone inside. Behind the palace windows, a young girl lies awake. Her name, still small and private, is Victoria. The sound of rain against glass is her only company, that, and the soft rustle of her governess pacing the corridor beyond her door. She has never known night to be free. Every curtain is drawn, every light trimmed before its time. The rooms of her childhood are full of rules, shadows, and careful whispers. She is watched when she eats, when she studies, when she plays with her spaniel Dash in the garden. Even her mother's affection comes measured, folded neatly between instructions, and glances toward the German advisor who governs their days, Sir John Conroy, a man whose voice seems to echo through every corridor like an order waiting to be obeyed. Freedom, for the princess, is something glimpsed only in dreams. Tonight, however, something feels different. The servants move with unusual speed, their footsteps sharp on the marble floors. A courier has come through the rain, his boots leaving tracks that no one bothers to wipe away. Somewhere, in a high room lit by trembling candlelight, her mother listens to a message whispered by a chamberlain. No one tells the child what has happened, only that she must rest, that the night is long. But the walls hum with change. Even the rain sounds heavier, as if the heavens themselves are waiting for dawn. At 5 o'clock, a knock comes at her door. Her governess enters, pale and trembling, and wakes her gently. "Your Majesty," she whispers. The words hang in the air like incense. For a moment, Victoria does not understand them. She is only 18, still half a girl, her hair tangled from sleep, her breath white in the cold of the room. But then she sees it in their eyes, the solemnity, the fear, the reverence. Her uncle, King William IV, is dead. The crown has passed, silently and irrevocably, into her hands. Outside, London begins to stir. Bells toll through the fog, slow and uncertain, their notes scattering across the river. The carriages lining the palace gates glisten in the rain. Somewhere beyond them, chimney smoke curls upward from the homes of a million subjects who do not yet know that their queen is awake, sitting alone at the edge of her bed with trembling hands folded in her lap. The rain continues, steady and unrelenting. She rises, walks to the window, and presses her palm against the cold glass. For the first time in her life, no one stops her. Beyond the blurred shapes of the gardens and the faint lights of the city, she senses the enormity of what has come, not just the crown, but the centuries waiting behind it. In that moment, the girl disappears, and the age begins. The mornings of Victoria's childhood begin in silence. Not the comfortable kind, but the kind arranged by duty, the kind that smells of starch and candle smoke. She wakes to the creak of her mother's footsteps outside her door, the measured voice of a governess announcing the day's lessons, and the rustle of papers Sir John Conroy insists she memorize. Latin phrases, royal genealogies, moral precepts, all recited before breakfast. Even at 10 years old, she knows her life belongs more to history than to herself. Kensington Palace is not a home but a system. Her mother, the Duchess of Kent, keeps her isolated under what the court will later call the Kensington system, a design of control so total it leaves no corner unmonitored. She is not allowed to walk down the stairs without holding an adult's hand. She may not see other children without permission. Even in the garden, she is shadowed by attendants who report every word she speaks. There are locks on doors she does not have keys to, and secrets spoken in German in rooms she cannot enter. She spends her afternoons in lessons, her evenings reading fairy tales beside the fire, the Arabian Nights, the Pilgrim's Progress, and stories of queens who lived and died in castles far older than hers. Sometimes she stares at the portraits of her ancestors lining the halls, grim men in armor, women stiff in pearls, and wonders if any of them were ever truly happy. She touches the velvet frames as she passes, tracing the dust that clings to them like old sorrow. When the palace sleeps, she slips from bed to look out the window. The city below is a blur of flickering lamps and chimneys breathing smoke into the night. Somewhere beyond the park, she imagines laughter, the laughter of children her age, the kind who run until they fall. It feels like another world. In hers, affection is rationed, warmth the reward. Her mother loves her, she is told, but love comes laced with supervision and the weight of expectation. Sir John Conroy becomes the second shadow in her life, always near, always instructing. He tells her what to say, what to write, how to smile when the court visits. He is not unkind, but his kindness tastes of calculation. The Duchess listens to him more than to her daughter, and so the young princess learns silence as survival, the art of nodding, of smiling when she wants to scream, of hiding the sharpness that grows quietly behind her careful eyes. There are small rebellions, a look held too long, a word spoken too boldly. Once, when her mother denies her request to visit a friend, Victoria stamps her foot so hard the glass in the door rattles. Later, she will write in her journal that she felt like a prisoner in her own house. By adolescence, she begins to keep a diary, hundreds of pages in neat handwriting, where she speaks freely for the first time. She writes of her longing for freedom, her dislike of Conroy, her hope that one day she might live and act for myself. These pages become her true inheritance, not jewels or titles, but words. Years later, when courtiers read them, they will find traces of a girl already bearing the weight of a queen. But for now, she remains alone in her candlelit world, a small figure moving through vast corridors, her breath visible in the cold, her dreams folded carefully between the pages of her diary. She does not yet know that freedom will come not as a gift, but as a death, that the night will end with a knock at her door, and the world beyond those locked corridors will finally belong to her. The morning air hangs heavy with rain, as if London itself has paused to breathe. The palace corridors are full of motion servants moving in silence, courtiers whispering near doorways, the faint clatter of boots echoing through marble halls. In a small chamber draped in rose-colored silk, the young Victoria sits upright in her chair. The ink on the royal papers has barely dried. A world she never touched is already bending around her name. She wears black in mourning, though the color feels foreign against her skin. Her eyes, still wide from sleeplessness, follow the gold-edged documents placed before her, proclamations of succession, declarations of loyalty, words older than she can yet understand. Her mother hovers near the doorway, but the air between them feels colder than the rain outside. The Duchess of Kent had dreamed of ruling beside her daughter, But Victoria knows, perhaps for the first time, that she stands alone. The Archbishop clears his throat and begins to read. The sound rolls like thunder through the room. By the grace of God, Victoria, Queen of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. The syllables seem to echo longer than they should, as if the title itself resists being spoken aloud. She signs her name with a trembling hand, the pen scratching over parchment like the faint sound of fate being written. They take her to the council chamber next. A sea of men in dark coats rises as she enters: ministers, dukes, generals, men who have served kings and outlived revolutions. She is the only woman in the room. The silence feels sharp, expectant. She nods to each in turn, her chin lifted higher than she feels. And when she speaks softly, deliberately, the sound surprises even her. "I shall do my utmost to fulfill my duty," she says, her voice steady as the rain against the glass. Later, she will write in her diary that the room looked at her kindly. But kindness, she learns quickly, is not the same as trust. These men have watched monarchs come and go. They will test her, as they test every ruler. But today, their caution softens. They see not a girl, but a sovereign with her mother, kept firmly beyond the door. For the first time in her life, Victoria breathes as if the walls have shifted. The air tastes of ink and independence. When the ceremony ends, the courtiers bow, the ministers file out, and she is left alone. She walks to the tall window overlooking Kensington Gardens. The rain has thinned to a mist, silvering the leaves and the rooftops beyond. Somewhere, church bells begin to ring, slow, solemn, endless. She presses her palm to the cold glass, and in her reflection, she sees not the child her mother guarded, nor the prisoner of the palace, but something new. In her journal that night, she writes, "Since it has pleased Providence to place me in this station, I shall do my utmost to fulfill my duty for the good of my people." The handwriting is precise, but the ink blots. Near the end, a small proof of the trembling hand that wrote it. Outside, the city swells with rumor and rain. Inside, a young queen learns the shape of solitude. Her crown has no weight yet, but already she feels its outline pressing against her heart, cold, steady, unremovable. The dawn of Coronation Day breaks pale and uncertain, like a candle struggling to stay lit against the London fog. The bells begin long before sunrise, their echoes tumbling across the Thames and into every crooked street. The city hums beneath it, horses snorting in the chill, boot heels splashing through puddles, vendors calling over the sound of drums. For the first time in memory, London wakes not to mourning, but to spectacle. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air smells of starch, perfume, and nervous energy. Servants move quickly through the halls, carrying velvet robes, white gloves, and the heavy golden regalia that glimmers under the gaslight. Victoria stands before her mirror, her dress of white satin cascading to the floor like a pool of moonlight. Pearls trace the line of her collarbone, and her hair, still soft with youth, is bound beneath a small diamond circlet. She studies her reflection and almost doesn't recognize the girl staring back. The weight of expectation has already begun to shape her face. Outside, the carriages line the courtyard like a procession of black beetles, their wheels caked in mud from the night's rain. Crowds are gathering in the streets, dock workers, factory women, children, hoisted onto shoulders, all pressed against the barriers for a glimpse of the young queen. The smell of coal smoke mingles with roses thrown from balconies. In the distance, the golden spire of Westminster shimmers faintly through the mist. When she steps into the carriage, the sound that rises from the crowd is not a cheer but something deeper, a collective exhale. The people see not just a monarch, but the promise of renewal, a break from the long decay of the past reign. She keeps her gaze steady, though her heart beats so fast she can hear it over the drums. At 20 miles an hour, she is carried through centuries of expectation. Westminster Abbey looms like a cathedral of stone dreams. The scent of incense and candle wax fills the air, mingling with damp wool, and the faint metallic tang of the crown itself. Nobles and bishops stand like statues in rows of crimson and gold. Every surface gleams, every sound echoes. As the organ swells, she walks down the long aisle, her slippers whispering over the worn flagstones, where kings and conquerors once knelt. When the crown is placed upon her head, it is colder than she imagined, heavier, too. The diamonds flash under the light like tiny frozen suns. For a moment, she cannot breathe. The choir's voices rise, and the anthem fills the air like thunder wrapped in velvet. She feels the vibration in her bones, a living pulse that connects her to every ruler before her and every subject beyond those walls. Later, when the ceremony ends and the carriages roll home, London explodes into light. Fireworks crackle over the river. The streets fill with laughter and song, but in the privacy of her chamber, the Queen sits before the mirror again, the crown resting on a cushion beside her. She removes her gloves slowly, her fingers trembling from the weight of it all. In her diary, she writes that the moment was beautiful, a most striking and affecting ceremony. Yet between the lines, her words carry something unspoken. The hush that follows applause, the silence that falls when the music ends. Outside, the city celebrates its new monarch. Inside, a young woman sits alone, listening to the echo of her own heartbeat beneath the crown. Morning sunlight slants through the high windows of Buckingham Palace, catching in the dust motes that dance above the marble floor. The new Queen's footsteps echo softly through the corridors, light, deliberate, and utterly alone. Her mother's rooms lie just beyond the eastern wing, their doors half closed like a warning. The Duchess of Kent is waiting, as she always has been, ready to reclaim what the night of accession quietly took from her. For 18 years, the Duchess ruled her daughter's world by proximity, controlling who she saw, what she read, when she slept, and whom she trusted. Sir John Conroy stood beside her like a shadow with a voice. Together they built a wall around Victoria, convinced that dependence would ensure obedience. But the moment the crown touched her head, the wall cracked. Power, once shared in whispers, now belonged entirely to the girl they tried to contain. Breakfast is taken in uneasy silence. The Duchess sits straight-backed, her smile polished, her tone sweet with reproach. She congratulates her daughter in public phrases, calling her "My dear Majesty," the words half blessing, half mockery. Victoria listens, hands folded neatly in her lap, her face composed into a mask of politeness. But beneath the table, her fingers tighten against the fabric of her gown. The tea tastes of iron and restraint. In her private journal that evening, she writes, "I was obliged to see my mother this morning. She seemed offended that I spoke of wishing to be alone." The ink trails slightly, as if her hand pressed too hard. The next day, she informs her staff that her mother will no longer share her rooms. The decision travels through the palace like thunder, swift, shocking, irreversible. The Duchess retreats to a distant suite, her pride wounded but her eyes still sharp. Sir John Conroy follows her, reduced overnight from kingmaker to servant. Rumours spread through London society faster than truth can catch them. Some say the Queen has turned cold. Others whisper that she has finally freed herself. Caricatures appear in the papers: Conroy, drawn as a spider, the Duchess as a weeping widow. The public devours the drama, but within the palace, the silence between mother and daughter hardens into ice. They dine apart. They walk the gardens at different hours. When their paths cross, they bow as strangers. And yet, beneath her anger, Victoria feels the faint tug of guilt. The habits of obedience die slowly. At night, she still hears her mother's voice echo through the corridors, issuing invisible commands: stand tall, speak softly, smile when you must. She obeys them out of muscle memory, even as she tries to forget. In the weeks that follow, her independence becomes her refuge. She wakes when she pleases, rides in the park without chaperones, reads novels that no one approves. Each small act feels like oxygen. Londoners who once pitied the lonely princess now marvel at the self-possessed young woman on horseback, her posture unflinching, her gaze fixed ahead. But freedom is never without shadow. The mother who shaped her will always remain a presence behind the drapes, a faint perfume lingering on the stair. Sometimes, when the palace grows too quiet, Victoria catches herself listening for footsteps that will never come, and though she would never admit it aloud, part of her misses the sound. Power has separated them, but blood has not. In the fragile calm after their estrangement, the Queen learns her first lesson of sovereignty, that to rule others, she must first learn to live without the ones who ruled her. The days after her mother's departure unfold in quiet astonishment. For the first time, Victoria wakes without the sound of footsteps outside her door. No governess hovers at the threshold. No advisor interrupts her breakfast with papers to sign before she's even finished her tea. The silence is strange, almost tender, a silence that belongs to her. She moves through the palace differently now. The servants bow more deeply. The courtiers choose their words more carefully. Her signature, once a formality under someone else's supervision, now carries the weight of a kingdom. Every morning begins with the sound of dispatches being opened, letters from ministers, reports from colonies, polite demands wrapped in language as ornate as the envelopes that contain them. She is 19, and the empire is enormous. In Parliament, men twice her age debate her every decision. In the papers, caricatures of her face appear beside headlines that swing between worship and doubt. Some call her the dawn of a new age. Others, a child pretending to wear a crown too large for her head. She reads none of it, or so she claims. But sometimes, late at night, she asks her attendants what the city whispers about her, and listens longer than she means to. Her first months as sovereign are a blur of ceremony and exhaustion. Every day brings processions, audiences, and introductions to the machinery of power. She learns the names of men who will never quite meet her eyes, who speak to her as if instructing rather than advising. Yet she listens. She asks questions. She studies until the candles burn low. In her journals, she writes with a sharpness that surprises even herself, observations on manner, strategy, sincerity. Beneath her neat script, the words pulse with quiet defiance. Still, the isolation gnaws at her. Her mother is gone, the courtiers are cautious, and the walls of Buckingham Palace, vast and gilded, feel emptier than ever. At night she dines alone in rooms meant for 20. The music stops too early. The fire crackles too loudly. Sometimes she sits by the window and watches the gaslights stretching toward the horizon, a kingdom made of flickering points of light, none of which she can touch. The few friends she keeps are women of her household, Lady Flora Hastings, the Duchess of Sutherland, and they too speak carefully, mindful of proximity to the crown. When they laugh, it is with a kind of reverence, as if even joy must now be edited. Her small dog Dash becomes her closest companion. She writes about him in her diary as if he were a confidant rather than a pet. In his company she can still be simply Victoria, not Her Majesty. Yet amid the loneliness, something solid begins to form within her, a quiet certainty, the first glimmer of the steel she will one day be known for. She understands that affection cannot be commanded, that trust must be earned, and that no one, not even a queen, is immune to doubt. When she appears in public, she lifts her chin higher. The crowds cheer, the flags rise, and she smiles, not the timid smile of the girl from Kensington, but the deliberate expression of a sovereign who knows she is being watched. It is not yet confidence, but something close, the performance of it, which, in time, may become real. And when she returns to her rooms each night, removing the tiara and the weight of the day, she stares into the mirror a moment longer than before. "I am alone," she writes in her journal, "but I am my own." It is not a complaint, it is a declaration. The first true act of rule begins in silence, and for Victoria, it has already begun. The year is 1839, and spring has softened London's edges. The Thames moves like pewter under the pale sun, and the gardens of Buckingham Palace are beginning to breathe again, roses budding, fountains stirring, the city itself waking from a winter that felt endless. Victoria stands at the window, her diary open on the sill. She has written of duty, of loneliness, of the constant pageantry that leaves her weary even in youth. But today her pen hesitates over a new word, one she rarely uses: anticipation. Her uncle Leopold, the King of the Belgians, has written to her for months about a young man from Coburg, her cousin, Prince Albert. He writes of his virtue, his intellect, his gentleness, his musical talent. She has met him before, years ago, when she was still half a child, and found him rather solemn, too reserved for her liking. But the years have turned them both into something different, she into a monarch, he into a man of purpose and discipline. Now he is coming to London again, and the thought of his arrival has unsettled her more than she dares admit. When his carriage finally appears through the palace gates, the Queen's heart begins to beat too loudly in her chest. The scene plays out beneath grey skies, a line of guards in scarlet, the sound of hooves striking stone, the scent of wet earth rising from the gardens. Albert steps out, his coat dark with rain, his hair neatly combed, his manner grave but not cold. He bows deeply, his gaze meeting hers with quiet steadiness. It is not the gaze of a man dazzled by a crown, but of one who sees the woman beneath it. They dine together that evening, a formal supper, lit by chandeliers that throw reflections across the silverware like captured stars. The courtiers murmur approval, the musicians play softly in the corner, but the air between Victoria and Albert hums with something unspoken. He speaks carefully, his German accent rounding each word, and when he listens, it is with an intensity that disarms her. She finds herself laughing more easily than she has in years. In her journal that night, she writes of him with almost breathless honesty. Albert really is charming, and so kind. He possesses every quality that could make a woman happy. The next morning, unable to contain herself, she sends for him. Tradition forbids a man to propose to a reigning queen, so she does what no queen has done before. She proposes to him. Her hands tremble as she speaks. His eyes widen in astonishment. Then he accepts, quietly, with the sincerity of someone who has no need to flatter. The engagement is met with polite astonishment in every court in Europe. Some say it is a love match, others a political one. But within the palace walls, it feels simple, a union born from loneliness, finally answered. She walks the gardens that evening with a lightness she has never known, the rain misting her face, the scent of lilac following her down the path. When she returns inside, she places her diary beside her bed and writes only one line before extinguishing the candle. I shall be happier than I have ever been before. Outside, the rain stops. The air holds still, as if even London is listening. And in that stillness, the young queen who once ruled alone begins, at last, to share her crown and her heart. The morning of February 10th, 1840, dawns cold and pale, the kind of winter light that turns London into porcelain. A light mist curls along the Thames, softening the outlines of St. James's Park. Inside Buckingham Palace, the corridors hum with a restrained kind of frenzy, footsteps on marble, hushed voices, the rustle of silk and lace. The Queen is to be married. Victoria rises before the bells, unable to sleep. Her ladies attend to her in silence, fastening the white satin gown that will soon make history. White is not the color of royal weddings. It is simple, modest, unbecoming of an empire. But she insists not for opulence, but for purity, for modernity, for the beauty of plainness. As the lace veil is laid over her hair, she looks at herself in the mirror and does not see the monarch the world sees, only a 20-year-old woman trembling at the threshold of love. In another room, Albert prepares with his usual composure. His uniform gleams, his expression unreadable. He is steady, disciplined, aware of the eyes that will watch him not just as a husband, but as a consort, a role with no clear shape, no precedent, in a kingdom where queens reign but rarely share. When he steps into the carriage that will take him to the Chapel Royal at St. James's Palace, the crowd erupts. The cheers roll like thunder through the cold air. The Queen's carriage follows soon after, pulled by 8 grey horses. Through the mist, thousands line the streets, men with hats in hand, women clutching their children to see the moment they'll remember all their lives. White flowers are thrown beneath the wheels. The sound of church bells swells and spreads, blending with the hum of the crowd and the distant echo of cannons fired in salute. Inside the chapel, every surface glows with gold and candlelight. The scent of lilies and wax mingles with the chill of February air. Victoria enters to the slow rise of the organ, her veil trailing like a small river of light behind her. Albert stands at the altar, his gaze fixed on her alone. For a moment, the grandeur of empire dissolves. There is only this: 2 people meeting in the heart of history, trying to keep their hands from trembling. The ceremony is brief but reverent. When she places the ring upon his finger, she does so with her own hands, ungloved, bare, human. When it is done, the cheers outside are deafening. The people of London, who have only known their young queen as a symbol, now see her as something more, a woman capable of love. They return to Buckingham Palace for the wedding breakfast, the great hall filled with laughter and candlelight. Victoria sits beside Albert, her cheeks flushed, her eyes alight with the kind of happiness that feels too fragile to last. She writes in her journal later that night, her gown folded neatly beside her bed, "I never spent such an evening. My dearest, dearest Albert, his excessive love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to feel before." Outside, the city glows with lanterns. Crowds sing in the streets. Even the poorest windows hold candles lit in celebration. And somewhere above it all, in the soft fog of the London night, the sound of bells lingers, not the heavy bells of duty or power, but the bright, trembling chime of something far rarer: joy. It is the first and last day Victoria will ever walk as both a girl and a bride. Tomorrow, she will wake as a queen once more, but this time, she will not face the throne alone. Married life begins not with trumpets, but with quiet. The pageantry fades, the guests disperse, and Buckingham Palace exhales into silence. For the first time since her coronation, Victoria is free of eyes, no ministers, no courtiers, no chaperones standing between her and her own heartbeat. She walks through the echoing halls beside Albert, her hand tucked into his arm, and the world feels startlingly small. 2 figures moving through gold and shadow, speaking softly enough that their words disappear into the high ceilings. The Queen and her husband fall quickly into rhythm. She calls him dearest, angel, my beloved. He calls her ma petite, mein Liebling, my only one. The words are simple, unguarded, unlike anything spoken in council chambers or audiences. They dine together in the evenings without ceremony. They take walks in the gardens at dusk, the lamps burning faintly against the mist. When rain drives them indoors, they sit side by side, at the pianoforte, she turning the pages, he playing with disciplined grace. In those early months, they live as though the palace were a cottage, their world contained in the warmth between them. She writes constantly in her journal, her pen spilling gratitude and wonder. My happiness is beyond words. Albert's love is my life. The intensity of her affection astonishes even her closest ladies. She depends on him utterly, not just for companionship, but for judgment, for comfort, for the calm she has never known. Albert, for his part, brings order to her chaos. Where she is impulsive, he is methodical. Where she rules by heart, he rules by reason. He advises her gently on state papers, correcting language, urging her toward balance. She resists at first, the proud young monarch, bristling against suggestion, but gradually she begins to trust his mind as she trusts his presence. Together, they find a rhythm between affection and authority. passion and restraint. Still, not everyone approves. Courtiers murmur that the queen is too besotted, that she has surrendered too much influence to her husband. Parliament worries about a foreign prince meddling in English affairs, yet Victoria pays no heed. In her eyes, he is not a threat, but a sanctuary. When the world grows too loud, the petitions, the ministers, the constant thrum of empire, she retreats to him, and the noise falls away. They escape often to Windsor, where life slows to something almost human. The castle smells of pine and polish. The fires burn deep and steady. Mornings begin with rides through the park. Afternoons end with tea beside the window, their spaniel asleep at their feet. Sometimes they wander the grounds without attendance, their laughter drifting between the trees. The people see them together and believe, perhaps for the first time, that their monarchs love one another not as duty, but as devotion. In those years, the world outside begins to change: steamships, railways, factories rising like iron skeletons across the land. But within the palace, time stands still. Letters between the two are filled with endearments rather than politics. Drawings of children yet to be born, small notes left on breakfast trays. Do not tire yourself, my angel. Think of me. It is a brief season, luminous, fragile, already fading even as it blooms. History will remember their reign for wars and inventions, but their truest legacy is built here, in these quiet mornings and candle-lit evenings, when an empire paused long enough for two hearts to build a world of their own. For now, the crown rests lightly. The queen smiles more easily, her laughter echoing down the marble corridors. She has found her balance not between thrones and ministers, but between love and power. And in the warmth of that fragile peace, the age she will define begins to take its breath. The first cry of the royal child echoes through the corridors of Buckingham Palace on a damp November morning in 1841. Outside, London is veiled in mist, its carriages halted as bells tolled to announce the birth of an heir. Inside, the Queen lies pale but radiant, her hand clasped around Albert's. The pain has passed. The silence that follows feels impossibly full. When the nurse places the small bundle in her arms, Victoria looks down at her son, fair-haired, pink, fragile, and writes later in her journal, "It was a blessed moment." The city rejoices. Crowds fill the squares and streets, shouting her name and his. Bonfires flicker along the Thames, their smoke curling into the November fog. In the newspapers, the birth of the Prince of Wales is hailed as a sign of stability, the continuation of a dynasty that once seemed uncertain. For the young queen, it is more than that. It is the completion of a circle she has only just begun to draw. For the first time since her childhood, she feels truly anchored. Motherhood comes to her awkwardly at first. She confides to her diary that she finds infants frightful when they cry, and admits to missing her independence. But she grows into it, finding her rhythm in small gestures, a touch, a lullaby, the quiet miracle of a sleeping child. Albert, meticulous and ever patient, is her constant guide. He studies child-rearing manuals, reorganizes the nursery, and insists their children should be raised with simplicity, not indulgence. Together they build a household that mirrors their vision for the empire itself, moral, orderly, industrious. The palace hums with new energy. Tutors arrive from Germany. Nurses in starched white move briskly through the halls. The royal nursery becomes a symbol of domestic virtue, its warmth contrasting with the cold grandeur of monarchy. Painters and newspapers seize the image the queen not as a distant sovereign but as a mother seated beside a cradle, her hand resting lightly on her child's head. It is a carefully crafted image, yet not an empty one. For Victoria and Albert, family becomes politics. The empire, vast and restless, is bound together by the illusion of home, the queen as moral compass, the prince as embodiment of progress. They attend scientific exhibitions, support education reform, and walk through factories thick with smoke to show sympathy for the workers whose labor fuels their wealth. When they appear on balconies, They are greeted not as rulers of distance, but as symbols of constancy. Yet, even within this domestic serenity, the machinery of empire grinds louder. Ships sail under her flag to every corner of the world, to India, Africa, the Pacific, bringing trade, faith, and conquest in equal measure. Victoria follows the reports with fascination, the words, "My empire," sitting both heavily and proudly in her mouth. She writes of her dear subjects abroad, imagining their loyalty, their gratitude, unaware that for many, her name is a shadow cast by bayonets and debt. At Windsor, none of that seems real. The evenings are quiet, filled with music and candlelight. Albert plays the organ. She reads aloud from her favorite poets. The firelight turns their faces gold, and for a few stolen hours the empire feels far away. Outside, the century is beginning to quicken steam engines, telegraphs, the rising heartbeat of modernity, but within the walls of their private kingdom, time still belongs to them. When the baby stirs in his cradle, she bends over him and whispers a lullaby in German, soft, low, filled with love that neither crown nor history can diminish. And though she cannot yet know it, the cry of this child will one day echo through continents, carrying both the glory and the burden of the age his mother is just beginning to define. London in the 1840s is a creature of iron and fire. The city no longer wakes to the sound of church bells alone, but to the clatter of hammers, the hiss of steam, and the endless groan of machinery. Coal smoke rolls through the narrow streets like weather, painting every building the same shade of grey. The Thames, once a mirror for the sky, runs black with industry, and over it all, the Union Jack flutters the banner of progress, empire, and exhaustion. From the high windows of Buckingham Palace, Victoria watches it unfold. The city stretches outward, its veins thick with railways and bridges, its heart pulsing with factories that never sleep. At night, the glow of furnaces stains the clouds red, as though dawn itself has been caught in the wrong part of the sky. She feels pride in the noise and movement, a living testament to what her reign is supposed to stand for. Yet somewhere in the sound, she hears unease. The moan of overworked engines, the distant cries of labourers, the thin cough of children who work too long and breathe too deep of soot. Albert, ever the visionary, sees only possibility. He walks through foundries and workshops with fascination, speaking to engineers and craftsmen, sketching designs in the margins of his notebooks. He dreams of an age where reason and invention might bind humanity together, an empire not of conquest but of creation. He speaks of iron as if it were a kind of faith, the element that might hold the modern world upright. The Queen, moved by his optimism, allows herself to be drawn into his vision. They visit new rail stations, the air thick with smoke and excitement. Crowds cheer as the royal train glides out of the platform, its carriages polished to mirror the sky. For the first time, a monarch moves not by horse or carriage, but by steam, the same force that drives the world she rules. She feels it in her chest as the train surges forward, a trembling power that seems to pull the future closer. But the progress that thrills her husband also frightens her people. In Parliament, voices rise in anger over machines that replace men, over hunger that grows faster than wages. The streets fill with petitions and protests. Outside the palace gates, ragged crowds shout for bread, for work, for change. Inside, Victoria writes in her diary of the distressing scenes among the poor, and prays that the world will right itself soon. The contrast between her life and theirs weighs heavily on her. She walks through rooms warmed by endless fires while London's slums freeze in the dark. She cannot yet see that this distance between the gilded and the grey will define her empire more than its inventions ever could. Yet something in her begins to stir, the uneasy awareness that the crown does not only symbolize power, but separation. At night, when Albert sits by the fire reading scientific journals, Victoria drifts to the window. The sky glows faintly over the rooftops, lit by the same flames that feed the factories. The hum of the city seeps. Even through the thick walls of the palace, a sound not of peace, but of endurance. She presses her hand to the glass and feels its faint vibration, as if the world itself is breathing faster, restless for what comes next. In her journal that night, she writes only one line: "The air smells of progress and something burning. The age of smoke and steel has begun, and though she cannot yet see it, it will shape her name as much as the crown she wears." The year is 1851, and London gleams like a new coin. The city hums with pride, anticipation, and the ceaseless rattle of construction. In Hyde Park, something extraordinary is rising, not a monument to kings or generals, but a cathedral of glass and iron, vast enough to contain the dreams of an age. Its walls shimmer in the sunlight, a palace built not of stone but of transparency. The people call it the Crystal Palace. Albert walks its unfinished floors before dawn, his breath clouding in the cool air. The scent of sawdust and steel fills his lungs. Every girder, every pane of glass has been measured by his hand, checked twice, adjusted once more. He believes in this building not only as a marvel of design, but as a symbol. It will hold the world's inventions, the triumphs of industry, the promise of unity through progress. The prince, who once seemed aloof and foreign, has become the quiet architect of Britain's greatest spectacle. Victoria visits the site, days later, her carriage stopping before the glittering facade. The light pouring through the glass dazzles her. She lifts a gloved hand to her eyes. "It is like a dream," she murmurs, and Albert smiles with quiet pride. The workers bow as she passes. She sees the machines spinning, looms, engines, instruments, all gleaming with the confidence of a civilization that believes it can master anything. In that moment, she feels as though the empire itself stands before her, solid and eternal. When the exhibition opens on the 1st of May, the city gathers like a tide. Thousands flood into Hyde Park, their footsteps echoing on the iron floors. The air hums with the mingled languages of the empire: English, Hindi, Arabic, Cantonese, Swahili voices carried from every corner of the map. The Queen stands beside Albert as the organ begins to play, and the glass ceiling above her seems to catch and hold the music itself. The spectacle overwhelms her. Here are carriages that move, without horses, clocks that count the stars, fabrics so fine they seem to melt in the hand. There are machines that can carve wood with human precision, engines that can lift tons of iron as easily as a child lifts a toy. The exhibits shimmer like miracles, and beneath them, the faces of the crowd glow with wonder. For a fleeting moment, she feels that her husband has built a temple not to power, but to possibility. That night, the newspapers print her every word, her every smile. They call her radiant, gracious, the very embodiment of modern monarchy. Yet in her private diary, she writes something different. "It was beautiful beyond description, yet I felt a strange sadness. So much power, and so little peace." For while the glass walls of the Crystal Palace reflect invention and empire, they also conceal the smoke of the factories that built them, the same hands that labor unseen. Albert sees it too, though he says nothing. He only stands beside her, watching the light fade. Through the glass, his face caught between triumph and melancholy. When the exhibition closes 6 months later, over 6 million souls have passed beneath its roof. It will be remembered as the height of their age, a moment when the future felt infinite, when Britain believed it could illuminate the world. But when the great hall finally empties and the last echoes die away, the Queen and her husband linger in silence. The glass shivers softly in the evening wind, reflecting their two figures like ghosts suspended in light. The Crystal Palace has proven that man can build anything except, perhaps, permanence. The map of the world lies open on the table in Victoria's study, oceans pale blue, continents washed in color. Every month, new shades of red bloom across it like slow fire. India deepens to crimson, Canada gleams like polished brick, and Africa begins to fill with borders drawn by hands that have never touched its soil. When the Queen leans over the map, Tracing those lines with her finger, she feels both awe and unease. The empire is growing faster than understanding can keep up. Each morning brings dispatches from distant lands, words written in neat script, but soaked in heat, dust, and ambition. Reports from Calcutta, Cape Town, and Hong Kong arrive alongside telegrams from missionaries, soldiers, and governors who call themselves her servants. They write of opportunity, of victory, of civilization carried by the Union Jack. But between the lines, there are tremors, famine, unrest, resistance, the heartbeat of an empire stretching too far, too fast. Albert studies the same maps differently. To him, the red is not conquest but connection. He speaks of trade routes, telegraphs, railways, of a network that will bind the world into one vast conversation. "We are building bridges, not empires," he tells her once, his voice calm and certain. She wants to believe him. She wants to see the world as progress, not domination. Yet the letters that cross her desk tell another story. In the drawing rooms of London, expansion is celebrated like destiny. Aristocrats toast to the Queen of the world. Poets write of Britannia's noble duty to guide the darker corners of the earth toward enlightenment. The newspapers print romantic sketches of distant colonies, palm trees, elephants, rivers made of gold. Few mention the soldiers who march under unforgiving suns, or the workers who collapse in the fields to meet the empire's demand for sugar, tea, and cotton. Victoria follows it all with fascination and pride. She studies the portraits of Indian Maharajas sent as gifts, their jewels glimmering under painted skies. She writes letters of gratitude to missionaries who convert souls in her name. When the British East India Company sends her silks and spices from the subcontinent, she touches the fabric as though it were proof of divine purpose. Yet sometimes, in quiet moments, she wonders what those distant lands would think of her, a small woman in black silk, ruling over millions she will never meet. By the mid-1850s, her empire is so vast that daylight touches it at every hour. The sun never sets on the British Empire, the papers boast, and she repeats the phrase with half belief, half prayer. The weight of it feels less like glory than gravity, a crown whose edges stretch across oceans. At Windsor, she walks with Albert through the gardens at dusk, the air sweet with lilac and damp grass. "Do you ever think it too much?" she asks him once. He pauses, his hand resting over hers. "Power always grows, beyond the measure of those who hold it," he replies. "All we can do is guide it toward good." The words comfort her then, but history will remember them differently. For even as they speak, ships are leaving British ports loaded with soldiers, rifles, and orders bound for lands where resistance has begun to stir. The Queen, who sees herself as a mother to her empire, cannot hear the distant thunder gathering across the seas. For now, the map remains untouched, the red still spreading. The candles flicker on the parchment, the air smells faintly of wax and ink, and outside, the evening sky bleeds the same color as the empire itself. By the mid-1850s, Victoria has become both the heart and the mask of her empire, adored and criticized, idolized and feared. Her portrait hangs in schools, post offices, and train stations from Liverpool to Lahore. Children recite her name before their lessons, soldiers toast her before battle. To millions, she is the face of progress, virtue, and stability. Yet behind the velvet drapes of Buckingham Palace, she remains a woman at war with herself, half monarch, half mortal, forever trying to reconcile one with the other. She wakes each morning to a routine that has not changed in years. Letters, audiences, reports, signatures, the slow grind of governance. Ministers bow and flatter, newspapers praise her wisdom, and still she feels the quiet unease of doubt. Albert's discipline steadies her, but his insistence on logic and restraint often clashes with the storm that brews within her heart. He governs by reason, she governs by instinct. Theirs is a union of intellect and emotion, constantly balancing, occasionally breaking. The world expects her to be both mother and monarch, saint and sovereign. The contradiction is unbearable at times. One day she is writing tenderly to her children, the next she is approving orders for troops in distant colonies. She mourns every loss in her private letters, the death of soldiers she has never met, the suffering of widows she will never see, and yet she signs the dispatches that ensure it continues. The papers call her compassionate. She wonders if she has simply learned to weep politely. The Industrial Revolution races forward without pause. She sees its marvels daily: new machines, new fortunes, new cities built almost overnight. Yet progress has its price, and even the Queen cannot ignore it. Her carriage passes through streets where the air smells of soot and sickness, where children work until their fingers bleed, where families sleep 5 to a bed. She donates to charities, founds, hospitals, signs, reform bills, all gestures of mercy, but the gulf between giver and receiver remains. She cannot cross it, no matter how she tries. Albert urges her toward reform. He speaks of education, sanitation, rational governance. She listens, nods, even admires him, but she feels the limits of idealism pressing close. Empires, like marriages, are built not only on virtue but compromise. And compromise, she learns, leaves stains that do not wash away. At night, she writes in her diary pages filled with contradictions that no court historian will ever publish. "I love my people deeply," she confides once, "but they do not know me. I fear they never will." She writes again of Albert, of the endless burden of his perfection. "He is so good and I am so weak," she confesses, half in envy, half in love. Yet despite her doubts, the world worships her image. Artists paint her as a goddess wrapped in white and gold. Poets call her the mother of nations. The illusion is complete. Even she begins to believe it sometimes. But in the small hours before dawn, when the gas lamps dim and the city falls quiet, she sits by the window and removes the jewels from her hair one by one. The crown leaves a faint ring across her forehead, and she rubs it absently, as though trying to erase it. Outside, London breathes beneath a blanket of smoke and stars. Inside, the Queen breathes too, not as monarch or icon, but as a woman caught between the weight of history and the pulse of her own heart. She is both ruler and prisoner, torch and shadow, saint and sinner. The contradictions do not weaken her, they define her. And from them, the Victorian age, her age, takes its shape. By the late 1840s, the great machinery of empire hums ever louder. But within the private chambers of Buckingham Palace, Victoria measures her world in smaller rhythms: birthdays, illnesses, piano lessons, and the quiet thunder of little feet echoing down polished corridors. She has become the matriarch of a growing dynasty, a mother of 9, her days divided between audiences with ministers and the endless noise of children at play. The royal nursery is its own kingdom. Albert has designed it with scientific precision, well lit, clean, and organized with military order. Charts of feeding schedules hang beside portraits of ancestors. Toys are carved from polished wood and kept spotless by nurses in starched white. Victoria visits often, though rarely for long. She adores her children fiercely. Yet motherhood, for her, is not the gentle surrender poets imagine. It is work, duty, and at times, confinement. She writes in her diary with disarming honesty, "An ugly baby is a sad sight, but they improve, thank God, and later, I do not enjoy being a cow." Albert, however, thrives in the role of father. He tutors the children himself, teaching geography, music, and drawing. His patience, though boundless, carries a firmness that leaves little room for rebellion. The children adore him, yet they also fear his disapproval more than their mother's temper. He is the axis around which their world turns: calm, methodical, reliable. Victoria watches him sometimes from the doorway, her heart swelling with pride and envy all at once. He possesses a serenity she will never master. Family life becomes both her refuge and her symbol. Portraits of the royal household appear in newspapers and engravings across the empire. The Queen seated by the hearth, Albert beside her, surrounded by rosy-cheeked children. The image is deliberate, curated, almost holy. The sovereign not as warrior or empress, but as wife and mother, the moral heart of a moral age. It is the image that will come to define her reign. Behind the painted calm, however, life is far messier. The children fall ill with fevers. The Queen frets over their tutors, their marriages, their behavior. She writes letters filled with exclamation marks and worry, scolding one child for laziness, another for insolence. Yet her affection runs deep. When her second daughter, Alice, writes tender letters from abroad, Victoria keeps them in a small wooden box beside her bed, reading them until the paper softens from touch. Evenings at Windsor are the family's most peaceful hours. After dinner, they gather in the drawing room, Albert at the organ, Victoria at the pianoforte, the older children singing in German. The younger ones fall asleep on rugs by the fire, their shadows stretching long across the floor. For a few hours, the noise of the world outside factories, Parliament, Empire, fades into nothing. The Queen looks around her and feels something close to peace. Yet, always, duty intrudes. Tomorrow there will be audiences to hold, letters to sign, ministers to please. The crown is never fully set aside, not even in laughter, but in these quiet domestic nights. Victoria glimpses something she never found in palaces or politics, a kind of ordinary happiness. She clings to it as the world around her grows more complex. Later, when the painters arrive to capture the royal family again, they ask her to hold the youngest child on her lap. She smiles as the artist arranges the pose. "Make us look," she says, as though we have no cares at all. The painter nods, the brush glides, and on the canvas, the illusion is complete, the perfect family of the perfect age. Behind the paint, unseen, the Queen exhales. For a moment, she almost believes it herself. The monsoon heat presses over Calcutta like a curtain when the first telegram reaches London. It is only a short report, an uprising in a regiment, unrest spreading through the northern provinces, but by the time it is read aloud in Victoria's study, the words have already grown heavier than they appear. Mutiny, the ministers call it. Rebellion. They speak of discipline, loyalty, empire. But behind their calm tones lies something else. Fear. India, the empire's brightest jewel, has turned against its crown. The Queen sits still as the news unfolds, soldiers shot, families massacred, villages burning. The names blur together, each one a wound. She listens in silence while her ministers debate reprisals, their language precise, their solutions brutal. Outside, the rain drums on the windows of Buckingham Palace, soft but relentless, like a second heartbeat she cannot quiet. For years, she has written of India with fascination, even affection. She treasures the silks, the ivory carvings, the paintings of Maharajas sent as gifts. She calls the country "my dear India," imagining it as a distant garden under her protection. But now that garden bleeds. The same ships that once brought her spices and jewels now return with soldiers and the wounded. London fills with rumors, tales of atrocities both real and exaggerated, and vengeance becomes the empire's prayer. Albert urges caution, as always. Justice, not wrath, he tells her, his hand resting over hers. But Parliament roars for punishment. The newspapers print stories of savagery and redemption in the same breath, painting the war as a moral crusade. In drawing rooms, society ladies speak of the Queen's burden, of her divine right to restore order. Victoria listens and nods, but when she returns to her private chamber, she stares long into the candle flame and wonders how far the light truly reaches. Months pass, and the rebellion burns itself into history. The British flag rises again over Delhi, but the cost is written in smoke. When the final reports reach her desk, she reads every page. Villages razed, prisoners executed, mothers widowed, children orphaned. She signs letters of condolence to British families, and then, without telling anyone, She writes a private note addressed simply to the people of India. It is brief, sorrowful, full of the faith she still clings to. We cannot forget the loyal among you, nor the wrongs that were done in our name. We are bound together still. The letter is never sent. After the uprising, the East India Company is dissolved. The governance of India passes directly to the crown to her. In 1858, she becomes empress in all but name, her dominion now official. The ministers assure her that the worst is behind them, that the empire stands stronger than ever. But in her private reflections she confides to her journal, how strange that loyalty and sorrow should come from the same land. At Balmoral, she begins collecting Indian art and inviting native attendants into her household. A small gesture, perhaps, but one that softens her solitude. They teach her phrases in Hindustani. She responds with kindness that confuses her court. The empire whispers that their queen has gone sentimental. But to Victoria, it is not sentiment, it is penance. In portraits painted during these years, she wears the same dark dress of mourning, but now surrounded by Eastern silks, gilded screens, and embroidered cushions, the empire folding into her very image. Yet behind her calm gaze lies the truth of all great conquerors, that power is not only claimed through victory, but haunted by it. When she next looks at the great map on her study wall, she lingers over India longer than before. The red still gleams under the lamplight, beautiful, terrible, enduring. She touches it gently, as though it were something alive, and whispers to the empty room, "My empire, my wound." The years following India's rebellion weigh heavily upon the Queen, yet Albert faces the same years with a restless, burning purpose. He cannot sit still amid the embers of empire. While others celebrate victory and dominion, he turns his eyes toward the future, to science, sanitation, architecture, education, and the belief that human reason can mend what conquest has broken. The palace becomes his laboratory. He sketches plans for new schools, lectures Victoria on urban reform, and fills their evenings with papers about drainage systems and the dangers of cholera. "If we can clean the cities," he says one night over dinner, "we can save lives faster than any war." His words are calm, but beneath them pulses an urgency born of conscience. He is not content to rule by symbol. He must build. Victoria adores and resents him for it in equal measure. His mind moves like a machine, efficient, tireless, unromantic, while hers aches for warmth and reassurance. He reads reports on mortality rates while she writes letters of sympathy to widows. He speaks of science as faith. She still believes in providence. Yet in their differences lies their strength. Together, they form the two halves of the century itself, logic and sentiment, progress and tradition. Albert's reforms begin to ripple through the kingdom. He champions the creation of museums and colleges, insisting that knowledge should not belong only to the elite. He consults engineers on new housing for the poor, encourages artists to blend craft with industry, and invites inventors to exhibit their designs before the royal family. Victoria watches with admiration, though she sometimes feels like a spectator at her own court. The people call him the good prince, but whisper that their queen has become the shadow of his intellect. At night, however, she sees the toll his vision takes. His health is delicate, his face grows paler with each year. When she urges him to rest, he only smiles, faintly. "There is no time," he tells her. "The world is changing faster than our hearts can follow." She realizes, perhaps too late, that her husband is not simply building a better Britain, he is racing against his own frailty. In 1861, he throws himself into yet another campaign, the reform of the army, the standardization of medical care for soldiers, the modernization of hospitals. He pores over reports from the Crimea, where Florence Nightingale's reforms have shocked the establishment. "Compassion," he says, "must learn discipline." Victoria listens, her heart swelling with pride even as unease prickles beneath it. He coughs more often now. His hands tremble slightly when he lifts a teacup. Still, he works. She writes in her diary, He labors like one possessed. I wish he would rest. But Albert's sense of duty is absolute, and perhaps, she thinks, fatal. In the evenings, when the household finally quiets, he sits beside the fire, blueprints spread across his knees, the light flickering across his tired face. She watches him in silence, feeling both love and helplessness. "You will make England immortal," she whispers. He looks up and smiles, not proudly, but with a gentleness that breaks her heart. "Nothing we build is immortal," he says, "but we can make the world kinder before it forgets us." Victoria reaches for his hand. His fingers are cool. Outside, the winter rain begins again, tapping softly against the window panes, the same rhythm that once heralded her crown. And though she cannot name it yet, something in that sound feels final, like a warning the heart understands long before the mind does. December of 1861 arrives heavy and grey, the kind of London winter that never quite becomes day. The fog seeps through window frames, clings to the curtains, and muffles the world into silence. Within the walls of Windsor Castle, fires burn in every hearth, but the air still feels cold, not from the weather, but from what is coming. Albert has fallen ill. At first, they call it a chill, then a fever, then something more serious. Victoria sits at his bedside, her fingers clasped around his, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes already know. He is only 42, her husband, her compass, her mirror. The doctors move quietly, their faces carved from professionalism and dread. They whisper of typhoid, of inflammation, of complications. She writes in her diary, her script smaller each day. "He is so ill. I cannot, will not, think of what it means." The palace moves, as if underwater. Servants tread softly through the corridors. Ministers send letters but dare not demand answers. And the children linger outside their father's door, listening to the sounds within, coughing, footsteps, the rustle of blankets. Even the clocks seem slower, as though time itself hesitates to go on. Victoria refuses to leave him. She reads to him from the Bible, brushes his hair back from his damp forehead, and smooths the sheets as if order alone could hold back death. At times he rouses, his voice faint but steady. "My dearest," he murmurs, "you must rest." But she will not. Sleep feels like betrayal. She clings to him, as she once clung to the certainty of youth, to the illusion that life could not break what love had joined. Outside Windsor, the world continues, trains whistle, markets bustle, Parliament debates, but inside, the Queen's universe has narrowed to a single room and a single heartbeat fading beneath her hand. On the evening of December 14th, Albert opens his eyes for the last time. The candlelight trembles over his face. "It is peace," he whispers, barely audible. Then he is still. Victoria does not cry at first. She sits motionless beside him, her hand resting on his. The fire burns low, the shadows gather. When they finally lead her away, she turns once more toward the bed and whispers, "There will be no one ever again like him, no one." The nation mourns with her, but not as she does. Black crape appears on every door, sermons fill every pulpit, and church bells toll across the empire. Yet the Queen's grief is deeper than ceremony. She vanishes from public life, retreating to the shrouded halls of Windsor and later to the grey solitude of Balmoral. The court waits for her return, but the years pass, and she remains in mourning. Her letters become confessions. "My life as a happy one is ended. The world is gone for me." The mirror in her chamber is covered with cloth. The music stops. Her dresses turn black and will never again be another colour. The woman who once embodied the empire now lives like a ghost inside it. Ministers beg her to appear, the people plead to see her face again, but Victoria hides behind the veil. The sun that once illuminated her reign has gone out. Outside her window, winter deepens. Snow drifts across the castle grounds, quiet and merciless. Somewhere beyond the frost, the empire carries on its ships still sailing, its factories still roaring, but for its queen, time has stopped. In the silence of that endless December, the age of Victoria becomes the age of mourning. The black dress becomes her armor. From the day of Albert's death, Victoria wraps herself in it like a second skin, crepe and jet, lace and shadow. She refuses color, refuses ceremony, refuses light. The corridors of Windsor fall silent but for the echo of her steps and the rustle of mourning fabric. Servants learn to move quietly. Ministers learn to wait. The Queen, who once ruled the most expansive empire on earth, now rules only over her own grief. At first, the country understands. Her sorrow seems noble, almost sacred, a symbol of fidelity so deep it becomes legend. Prints of her in mourning sell by the thousands. Women across Britain wear black ribbons in imitation, and poets call her the widow of the world. But months turn to years, and sympathy begins to curdle into impatience. The people crave their monarch's presence. They long for her return to public life, for the reassurance of her steady gaze. Instead, she vanishes into shadow. She retreats first to Windsor, then to Balmoral, the cold Scottish air suiting her solitude. The granite walls of the castle rise against the moors like a fortress built from her own resolve. There, among the heather and mist, she walks the hills alone. The wind howls, the stags call from the distance, and she finds in the wild landscape a reflection of her own isolation. Albert's absence is everywhere, in the empty chair by the hearth, the silent pianoforte, the folded dressing gown left untouched. She orders his rooms preserved exactly as he left them, down to the papers on his desk and the toothbrush in its glass. To change anything would be to admit that he is truly gone. Her letters become elegies. To her children she writes of beloved Papa, the words always capitalized as if they belonged to scripture. She calls him my life, my all, and insists that his spirit guides her still. Ministers must address her through intermediaries. She cannot bear the sight of unfamiliar faces in the firsting spaces where Albert once stood. Even portraits of him, those calm, steady eyes, that measured expression, draw tears she cannot control. But the world does not stop for grief. Revolutions stir in Europe. New colonies rise in Asia and Africa. The empire continues to expand, its pace unbroken by her absence. Newspapers begin to question her seclusion. The Queen, one writes, has forgotten her people in her devotion to the dead. Another dares to ask whether she still governs at all. The criticism wounds her deeply. She writes in her journal, "They know not that my heart is buried." And yet, life insists on intruding. Her children marry, one by one, scattering across Europe to sit beside foreign thrones. Grandchildren are born. She attends none of the weddings, sees few of the babies, but her letters overflow with advice and affection. "Be good and kind," she writes. "Hold fast to duty. Remember always that love is sacred." Her grief, vast as it is, cannot extinguish the instinct to mother even from afar. Years pass. The empire grows brighter, while its queen grows dimmer, a living relic draped in memory. The people who once adored her begin to call her the invisible queen. But in the quiet of Balmoral, as the fire dies each night, she still feels Albert's hand upon her own, not warm, but present. She whispers to the dark, "You are not gone. You cannot be gone." Outside, the snow settles softly on the hills. Inside, the Queen sits before the fire, surrounded by silence, her shadow stretching long across the floor, a monument not of marble, but of mourning. The age that bears her name continues without her, but she does not yet see that even grief, like empire, cannot last forever. The years of mourning stretch like winter itself, endless, grey, unyielding. But even the longest frost begins to thaw. By the late 1860s, the empire that once whispered its condolences to a veiled widow now grows restless. Her ministers plead for her return. Her people chant her name at processions where she does not appear. Newspapers print her silhouette beside words that cut, "Our Queen forgets us." At first, Victoria ignores them. She sees herself not as absent, but as faithful, faithful to Albert, to love, to memory. To move forward would be to betray all three. Yet time, steady and indifferent, moves without her. Children marry, grandchildren grow, and her ministers age in their posts. Even the palace feels different now, filled with new voices and the constant ticking of clocks that will not stop. Then, one spring morning, she opens a letter written in an unfamiliar hand. It is from a working woman in Manchester, not a noble, not a politician, just a citizen. Your Majesty, it reads, we still love you, but we wish to see you smile again. When you grieve forever, it makes the whole nation sad. Victoria reads it twice, then sets it aside. But the words linger, quietly unsettling, like sunlight creeping under a closed door. Encouraged by her advisers, she agrees at last to appear in public again. The preparations begin cautiously. Streets are swept, banners hung, and carriages polished until they gleam. As the day approaches, London hums with anticipation. For years, she has been more myth than monarch, a name spoken softly, a figure glimpsed only in portraits. Now, the people will see her in flesh and motion once more. On the morning of her return, she dresses not in jewels or crown, but in her familiar black gown, the symbol of her unending devotion. The veil remains, but thinner now, almost translucent. When she steps into the open carriage, the sound that greets her is not silence but a roar. Tens of thousands line the Mall, their voices rising in unison, not demanding, not mourning, but welcoming. God save the Queen, they shout, and for the first time in years, she feels those words like warmth. As the horses move through the crowd, she lifts her gloved hand in acknowledgement. Faces blur together, soldiers, mothers, factorymen, children perched on lampposts waving flags. The sound is overwhelming, waves of cheers breaking over her until she cannot distinguish where her grief ends and their affection begins. In that moment, the divide between sovereign and subject, widow and woman, begins to dissolve. That night, she writes in her diary, the people were so kind, so loyal, it touched me deeply. I have not been forgotten. It is a simple line, but it marks the turning of a tide. In the months that follow, she resumes small duties, opening hospitals, visiting schools, writing letters of condolence and gratitude. Each gesture is cautious, but real. The public, who once accused her of neglect, now see her vulnerability as proof of her humanity. The legend of the widow of Windsor transforms into something gentler, the mother of the empire. At Balmoral, where Albert's ghost still lingers in every corridor, she feels his absence less sharply. The pain remains, but dulled by the passage of years and the soft insistence of life returning. When she looks out over the heathered hills, she does not see desolation anymore, only distance. The Queen has not forgotten her mourning, but she has remembered her people, and as the empire grows brighter, hungrier, and louder around her, she discovers that duty, in the end, is another form of love. When she appears again on the balcony months later, pale, veiled, but smiling, the crowd below surges like the sea. The bells ring for her not as a widow, not as a monarch, but as something rarer, a woman who found her way back from silence. Even as the cheers of her return echo through the streets of London, Victoria does not shed her black. The fabric has become more than mourning attire, it is her vocabulary, her signature, the language through which she speaks to the empire and to herself. What began as grief has become identity. She wears sorrow not as a wound, but as devotion made visible. In every portrait painted of her, the same colors repeat: jet, onyx, obsidian. Jewels glint like captured tears at her throat. Her dress, her parasol, her gloves, all black. The world has never seen a monarch so constant in color, so absolute in tone. Even the court follows suit. Ladies of rank adopt subdued shades. Society events quiet their excesses. Mourning becomes fashionable, even elegant. The Queen's sadness seeps into the seams of the age until it is not merely hers, it is England's. Merchants seize upon the trend. Mourning warehouses open on Oxford Street, offering veils in the royal style, and ribbons of approved length for widows of good taste. Etiquette manuals multiply, detailing how long each relation must mourn: 1 year for a husband, 6 months for a parent, 6 weeks for a cousin. The rules are precise, as though grief itself can be measured by calendar and cloth. Victoria watches this with a strange mix of pride and unease. She never meant to create a fashion. She only meant to remain faithful. Yet she understands what it means to live through symbols. Her black gowns, her solemn portraits, her refusal to remarry, all have turned her into a national emblem of constancy in an era that moves too quickly to rest. Letters pour in from across the empire, widows thanking her for dignifying their sorrow, clergymen praising her virtue, young women confessing that they find comfort in the sight of her veiled face. She responds to many, always with gentleness, always with some variation of the same sentiment, that love, once true, does not die, but transforms. In a world driven by invention and expansion, she has become a reminder of something older, the sanctity of remembrance. At Balmoral, the rituals of mourning take on a quieter rhythm. Each morning she walks the paths she once shared with Albert, her footsteps crunching softly over the frost. At night she lights a candle in his old study and leaves it burning until dawn. The servants no longer question these habits. They understand that for the Queen, grief has become prayer. But even as she sanctifies memory, life creeps back in. New inventions capture her fascination: photographs, trains, the telegraph. She allows herself to be photographed now and then, the images revealing not frailty but endurance, her face pale and unsmiling, her eyes clear as glass. The people adore these portraits. They hang them in parlors and post offices, proof that even sorrow can be majestic. Still, she cannot help but notice how the world interprets her image differently than she feels it. To her, the black is love. To them, it is power. To her, silence is devotion. To them, it is strength. She has become both muse and mirror to an empire that projects its own myths upon her shadow. One evening, while writing in her diary, she pauses over the inkpot and stares at her reflection in the window, the faint outline of a veiled figure against the dark. "I am their queen," she writes slowly, "but I am also their symbol." She closes the book and blows out the candle. The room falls into darkness, but the faint scent of smoke lingers, the perfume of mourning turned into ritual, memory turned into rain. In her grief, she has become timeless, and though she cannot see it yet, the empire will one day remember her less for her victories than for this, the woman who taught a century how to wear sorrow with grace. The year is 1857. India, jewel of the empire, burns again, not with ceremony or pageantry this time, but with rage. The letters arrive in London heavy with news. Revolts, massacres, and sieges. Entire regiments have risen against their British officers. The papers call it the Mutiny, though to many it is the first war for freedom. The empire's brightest possession has become its most volatile wound. Victoria receives the reports at Windsor, her tea cooling beside the telegrams. She reads each line slowly, the words blurring: Cawnpore, Delhi, Agra. She has seen those names only on maps before. Now they are written in blood. Her ministers speak of vengeance and order. The generals call for retribution. The Queen listens in silence, her fingers tightening around the arm of her chair. When they leave, she opens her diary and writes, "There must be justice, not cruelty." But she knows how little control she truly holds. Across the subcontinent, rebellion spreads like a monsoon. British garrisons fall. The old Mughal capital, Delhi, rises under a fading emperor's banner. For months the empire teeters, its power exposed as something fragile and human. And though Victoria is 3,000 miles away, she feels the tremor of it in her bones. She imagines Albert's calm voice urging reason, but Albert is gone, and the empire no longer listens to mercy. In the House of Commons, speeches thunder about divine punishment and British honour. Paintings and pamphlets depict the uprising in lurid detail: soldiers slain, women murdered, churches burned. The public cries for revenge. Few mention the hunger, the taxes, the decades of humiliation that festered long before the first shot was fired. The story becomes simple: civilization against savagery, and at its center stands Victoria, distant, grieving, yet somehow responsible for it all. When Delhi falls, the victory feels hollow. The city's palaces are looted, its streets stained red. Dispatches describe the slaughter as justice. The Queen reads them with shaking hands. "Enough," she whispers. "Enough of this blood." That night she cannot sleep. She dreams of fire, of the great map in her study igniting, its red colonies burning to ash. When morning comes, she summons her secretaries and dictates a message to her Indian subjects. She writes not as a conqueror, but as a mother addressing wounded children. "We hold ourselves bound to respect their faiths and customs. All shall enjoy equal protection under our law." It is not an apology. The empire does not know that word, but it is a plea for healing. In 1858, the East India Company is dissolved. Its charter, the private empire of merchants, ends. India is brought under the direct rule of the crown. For the first time, Victoria becomes not merely Queen of England, but sovereign of an empire that stretches across half the world. The proclamation that bears her name is read aloud in both English and Urdu, echoing through mosques, temples, and barracks. Some kneel as they listen, others turn away. In London, bonfires blaze in celebration. The empire believes order restored, but Victoria feels no triumph. She writes that evening, "The war has left deep scars, and not only abroad." She presses the pen harder than she means to, the ink bleeding through the page. The rebellion ends, but its ghosts linger. Every shipment of Indian silk, every spoon of sugar, every carved ivory trinket carries its memory. And when Victoria looks upon the jewels Albert once admired, the great sapphire from Bombay, the diamond from Lahore, she feels their shimmer like accusation. The sun may never set on her dominions, but she knows now what light conceals. That empire, however vast, is made not only of loyalty and faith, but of silence, grief, and fire. Balmoral rises from the Scottish hills like a fortress of stone and mist, its towers catching the pale light of early morning. The estate is surrounded by heather and pine, the air sharp with frost and scent of the moors. Here, far from London's fog and Parliament's clamouring, Victoria seeks refuge from the empire's weight, from the relentless machinery of duty, from the shadows of Albert's absence. Every morning, she walks the gravel paths, her black skirts brushing against frost-crusted bushes, listening to the wind whistle through the pines, carrying the distant call of deer and the subtle rhythm of streams under ice. It is in these quiet corridors and endless corridors of hills that she begins to write again. Letters meant not for ministers or courtiers, but for the empire's far reaches. She writes in English, in German, sometimes in French, her script precise and deliberate, sending words to governors, colonial administrators, and even to Indian princes, attempting to bridge the vast distances that separate her from the people over whom she rules. Some letters are full of gratitude for loyalty shown during past rebellions, others of encouragement to continue the work of governance, and some are simply notes of remembrance, signed with the tenderness of a mother, not a monarch. The letters are accompanied by small gifts, books for children, parcels of tea, and, for certain Indian and Scottish dignitaries, delicate silver trinkets carved in Balmoral's workshops. The Queen believes that even the smallest gesture can carry meaning across oceans and mountains, a thread of connection between her and the lands she cannot walk, the subjects she cannot touch. Often, she writes late into the night, candlelight flickering over her papers, her hand tiring but her purpose unwavering. But the Highlands offer more than a vantage for correspondence. They offer perspective, a way to measure herself against something older, something enduring. The day, hills have seen centuries of kings and clans, of battles and truces, of life and death in equal measure. Here, Victoria feels the weight of her lineage not as burden, but as companionship. She walks the same paths that Albert once traced, the places where he found joy in small discoveries, and she imagines his voice guiding her still. In the cold Scottish air, she can almost hear him quiet, reasoning, relentless in vision, and she draws strength from it. Despite the isolation, she does not fully escape the reach of politics. Telegrams arrive daily, each one a reminder that the empire pulses beyond the moors. Reports of unrest, trade disputes, and colonial law require her approval. Ministers write as if she is still in London, seated at a mahogany desk beneath chandeliers. Victoria reads them, answers when necessary, but increasingly relies on her secretaries to filter the urgent from the trivial, conserving her energy for the letters she writes by choice, not obligation. It is, during these quiet hours, that she writes to John Brown, the trusted Scottish attendant who becomes both confidant and companion. In her letters, she allows herself honesty, fear, sorrow, memory of Albert, longing for understanding. He responds with care and discretion, the correspondence forming a lifeline across time zones, social hierarchies, and emotional barriers. Through him, she finds a way to reconcile mourning with presence, grief with duty, distance with intimacy. At night, she sits by the window of her private chamber, candlelight warming the frost outside. Her pen hovers over blank sheets, ready to carry her thoughts across the empire, to places she will never see, to faces she will never know. Balmoral becomes not only a refuge, but a bridge, a quiet headquarters for a sovereign learning that even absence, grief, and memory can speak with power. The letters continue, day after day, year after year, a testament to the quiet force of a queen who, though veiled in black, shapes her empire not with armies alone, but with ink, intention, and the persistent whisper of care that stretches across mountains and oceans alike. The empire is never silent. Though Victoria sits cloistered in the quiet halls of Balmoral, distant lands hum with life, rebellion, and expectation. Telegrams crackle across continents, letters pile in the palace, and every sunrise brings new reports from governors, generals, and administrators stationed across the sprawling dominions of Britain. From Canada's frozen north to the lush plains of India, the crown's subjects breathe, toil, and sometimes resist, and the Queen must listen, even from afar. Victoria reads the dispatches one by one, her eyes narrowing over the black ink that brings the world to her chamber. Revolts smolder in small towns of India, taxation disputes flare in Australia, trade agreements falter in West Africa. The reports are clinical, meticulous, and devastatingly clear, each missive a reminder that an empire is not built of loyalty alone. It is also held together by fear, bureaucracy, and sometimes violence. She writes notes in the margins, questions scribbled for her ministers, commands filtered through layers of secretaries. Each word she pens carries weight, invisible yet absolute, like the press of a crown upon her brow. Albert's absence haunts her still. He would have approached these matters with precision, balancing compassion with calculation. Alone, Victoria must navigate decisions that affect millions. She considers every angle, the potential for uprising, the cost in lives, the risk to the crown's reputation. She reads reports of Indian regiments mutinying under officers they once trusted, of villages destroyed in retribution, of governors writing desperate pleas for reinforcements. Her pen hovers over the paper, heavy with responsibility. For a moment, she imagines the smoke rising over Delhi, the cries of the wounded carried on hot winds, and feels the empire's pulse in her own chest. Yet there are moments of hope, glimmers of allegiance that give her pause. Letters arrive from loyal subjects who swear devotion, reports from soldiers who acted with restraint and honor, notes from colonial administrators who govern wisely, balancing the crown's demands with humanity. Victoria clings to these threads, weaving them into her understanding of the empire. It is not perfect, it never will be, but it is hers to guide. Even at Balmoral, the Queen must reckon with public perception. Newspapers print stories of distant conflicts as triumphs or tragedies, often exaggerating events for drama. She reads them cautiously, knowing that empire lives as much in image as in action. A victory in a colonial skirmish is celebrated in London with cheers and medals, but Victoria knows the hidden cost: the lives lost, the families displaced, the fear that simmers beneath allegiance. Her journal fills with quiet judgments, balancing pride in her dominions with sorrow for the human toll. Letters to India, Canada, and Australia are her way of speaking back to the empire, asserting presence even when absent. Each carefully worded note, sometimes encouragement, sometimes reprimand, always acknowledgement, carries her authority across seas and mountains. She signs them personally, her hand steady despite the weight of expectation. Each signature is a tether, linking her distant subjects to the woman who, though veiled in mourning, still commands every inch of their lives. By nightfall, Victoria sits beside the fire, the Scottish wind pressing against the castle walls. Outside, the hills are dark, the moors quiet. Inside, the empire hums, its pulse carried by ink, paper, and telegraph. She leans back in her chair, exhausted but resolute. Though Albert is gone, and though she governs from solitude, the empire writes back, and in every letter, every report, every telegram, she hears it, the voice of a world that will not wait for grief to pass, a world demanding her attention, her care, and her rule. The candle flickers in the hearth. Victoria dips her pen once more, and the silence of the highlands becomes a conduit, carrying her words across oceans, through deserts and jungles, into the very heart of the empire she alone sustains. By the early 1860s, Victoria has become more than a monarch. She is an emblem, a living symbol of continuity and authority. Her black gowns, once a sign of mourning, now carry the weight of an entire era. In London, streets are named after her, portraits hang in every public hall, and newspapers recount her words and deeds as if they were scripture. She moves among ministers and diplomats with the same deliberate caution that once guided her private steps through Kensington Palace. But now the corridors of power are hers in both presence and legend. The empire stretches farther than any human could traverse in a lifetime. Ships sail to India, Canada, Australia, and Africa, carrying commerce, soldiers, and administrators. Railways and telegraphs stitch together continents that once felt distant and unknowable. Victoria's signature, written with unwavering precision, rests upon dispatches that determine the lives of millions. Each decision she makes, even a minor appointment or a note of encouragement, ripples across the globe. And yet, for all the reach of her authority, she remains tethered to the private pain that never fully leaves her. Albert's absence shadows her every thought, even as she enforces law, order, and ceremonial magnificence with unflinching resolve. Her public appearances are measured, ritualized, almost theatrical. She attends openings of railways and hospitals, inaugurates monuments, and receives ambassadors from kingdoms near and far. Each act is both spectacle and strategy, demonstrating that the crown endures even when grief lingers behind the veils. The people watch and interpret, sometimes misunderstanding the solemnity as coldness, sometimes admiring it as strength. In her private journals, Victoria writes of the contradiction daily. I am loved, feared, revered, yet still alone. The Queen's domestic life mirrors her public reign. The palace, Balmoral, and Windsor remain centres of both family and governance. Children and grandchildren pass through the halls, their voices a delicate counterpoint to the silence left by Albert's absence. She attends to them with care, setting expectations and teaching lessons in duty, morality, and loyalty. Yet she also allows them glimpses of warmth, private laughter, and affection that the public will never see. In this way, The queen molds not only a family but the image of an entire dynasty, disciplined, revered, yet profoundly human. In matters of policy, Victoria is meticulous. She studies the details of colonial administration, the reports of governors, the letters of generals and civil servants. Each telegram and dispatch is read with an attention that never falters. She debates ministers in council, questions the military, and weighs economic decisions with precision. Her mind, once shaped by isolation and youth, has grown sharp, capable, and unyielding. To the world, she is the embodiment of British stability. To herself, she is still a woman navigating the constant tension between authority and sorrow. Art, culture, and innovation flourish under her reign, often guided quietly by Albert's vision and her continuing influence. Museums open, public education expands, and sciences receive unprecedented patronage. The Queen fosters what she cannot directly control, a nation of intellect, invention, and industry, while personally attending to what she can. The faces of her family, the ritual of the crown, and the quiet maintenance of order. At night, she walks through the halls alone. The firelight casts long shadows across the polished floors, echoing the paths of her life. Childhood constrained, youth thrust into power, marriage filled with love, and widowhood transformed into reign. She lifts her hand to a portrait of Albert and whispers a name into the silence. Then she straightens her shoulders and walks on. Victoria has become, in every sense, the Iron Lady of an age. The empire bends and shifts beneath her feet, yet she endures unbowed, unbroken, and unmistakably present. For generations to come, she will be remembered not only as the queen who reigned, but as the woman who became her era itself. A sovereign, carved from both grief and devotion, discipline and love, shadow and light. By the mid-1860s, Victoria's children have begun to scatter across Europe, their marriages weaving a network of influence that stretches far beyond Britain's borders. Each union is carefully considered, balancing politics, allegiance, and the perpetuation of the dynasty. Her children are her legacy, living extensions of the crown, and she measures them with the same precision she once used to navigate the corridors of Kensington Palace. Yet even in their triumphs, she feels the delicate pull of absence, the ache of distance from the youngest hands she once held. The eldest, Victoria, Princess Royal, marries Friedrich of Prussia, destined to become German Empress. Letters arrive thick with formalities and praise. Yet Victoria reads between the lines, the anxieties of a young mother entering a foreign court, the weight of protocol, and the subtle tension between love and duty. She writes back with instructions and encouragement, guiding her daughter with the duality only a mother and monarch can wield: part affection, part authority. Albert Edward, heir to the British throne, grows under the shadow of expectation. The Queen watches him closely, ensuring that lessons of statecraft, history, and responsibility are instilled alongside moral discipline. She demands propriety, intellect, and loyalty, but secretly hopes that he will learn, in the quiet hours, the softer arts of empathy and patience. His letters to her, once full of youthful bravado, now carry the weight of responsibility, and she reads them as carefully as any dispatch from India or Canada. The other children, Alice, Alfred, Helena, Louise, Arthur, Leopold, and Beatrice, each follow paths dictated by marriage, rank, or imperial duty. Their marriages, carefully orchestrated, tie Britain to kingdoms across Europe, consolidating influence and fostering alliances. Victoria takes note of every correspondence, every report from foreign courts, absorbing information as a river absorbs tributaries. She rejoices in their accomplishments, celebrates their growth, and admonishes them when she detects indulgence or frivolity. Her voice carries across continents through letters that are both intimate and formal, guiding the empire's next generation as though shaping clay with meticulous hands. Yet even as her children succeed abroad, the queen grapples with the tension between proximity and power. She cannot walk beside her eldest in Berlin, cannot attend her daughter's courtly gatherings in distant duchies, cannot shield her grandchildren from the burdens of royalty. The empire demands presence even as her heart longs for domestic closeness. She writes late into the night, her letters tender yet precise, her affection coded in the careful curves of ink across paper. Each missive is a lifeline to children whose voices she cannot hear, whose laughter she cannot touch, whose lives are bound to dynastic duty in ways she knows intimately. The Queen also observes how the world interprets her family. Presses across Europe marvel at the unity and discipline of the British royal household, portraying the children as paragons of morality and civility. Victoria reads each report and editorial, noting exaggerations and embellishments. She allows the acclaim, knowing the image serves the empire, but quietly maintains that the true work of motherhood and rulership is invisible, residing in counsel, letters, corrections, and whispered guidance. In moments of solitude, she walks the corridors of Windsor or Balmoral, imagining the distant courts where her children reside. She pictures them performing their duties, attending balls, meeting ministers, making decisions that ripple through kingdoms. Each is a piece of her legacy, a reflection of her values and her mourning, her love and her discipline. And though they are far away, she feels their presence in her daily rituals, the meals she prepares for the household, the letters she pens, the careful planning of each public appearance. The empire is vast, but it is also intimate in these connections. Her children are both her joy and her responsibility, her pride and her burden. Through them, the Queen extends herself across oceans, borders, and generations. And in that extension, Victoria achieves something nearly impossible. She governs not only a kingdom, but a family that embodies the empire itself, a living testament to the age she defines. London in the 1860s is no longer a city of gaslight and cobblestone alone. It has become a living, breathing organism, expanding with a force almost beyond comprehension. The hum of industry pervades every corner, the clatter of railways, the hiss of steam engines, the incessant pounding of machinery and factories that rise like iron skeletons across the horizon. Even at dusk, when the sun fades behind thick smoke, the city glows, windows lit with labor, lamps lining streets, and the occasional spark of furnace fire catching in the fog. Victoria observes it all from the palace windows, her black gown a sharp contrast against the hazy, restless sprawl of her capital. The empire she rules pulses through the veins of this city. Ships laden with trade arrive daily at the docks, bringing raw materials from India, Africa, and the Americas. Factories churn cotton, steel, and machinery, feeding the demands of a population that grows hungrier by the hour. Yet, amidst the noise and smoke, there is unease. Children work in workshops where the sun never reaches, their small hands bruised and bleeding. Families crowd into single rooms, shivering beneath thin blankets, while the wealthy dine by candlelight, oblivious to the suffering nearby. Every report that reaches the Queen's desk is a reminder that progress has a price, that empire is sustained by both triumph and exploitation. Victoria feels the contradiction acutely. She believes in duty, in law, in order, yet she cannot ignore the human toll. She writes letters to ministers, urging reform, improved sanitation, better housing for workers, attention to health in overcrowded districts. Her words are measured, deliberate, and occasionally ignored, but she persists, believing that a sovereign's voice can be a quiet force, even when drowned in the roar of industry. Albert, if he were alive, would have urged even greater action. His vision encompassed not only the prosperity of the empire, but the moral well-being of its citizens. Victoria finds herself channeling his legacy in these decisions, instituting committees, reviewing plans for hospitals, inspecting schools and orphanages. She walks the fine line between monarch and mother, ruler and advocate, her judgment shaped by both duty and conscience. Public opinion is fickle. The newspapers praise the Queen for her steadfastness, her attention to the city's expansion, her concern for education and science, yet they also scorn her for perceived inaction in matters of industrial reform, for allowing smoke to blot out the sky while children labor. She reads these critiques in silence, noting their details in her journal, weighing them alongside reports from officials and first-hand observations from trusted aides. She does not rush to defend herself. The city will judge, but her decisions are not made for applause. At night, Victoria retreats to Balmoral or Windsor, seeking solace in the Highlands or the castle's quiet halls. Even here, the pulse of the city reaches her through letters, telegrams, and reports. She imagines the streets crowded with workers returning home, the smell of coal thick in their lungs, the cries of children mingling with the clatter of carts. She wonders what it is like to grow up beneath that smoke, to walk the alleys where shadow and soot reign, and she resolves that every action she takes, however small, must honor those who labor unseen. Yet despite the hardships, there is beauty in London's rise. Bridges span the river like iron veins, railways connect neighborhoods and factories, and the hum of progress carries with it hope. Victoria sees the potential for transformation not just of wealth, but of society, morality, and knowledge. She dreams of the city as a living testament to an empire capable of greatness, not merely power. As she closes her journal and looks out across the fog-laden skyline, the Queen realizes that her reign is inseparable from the city itself. Its growth, its triumphs, its failures all bear her imprint. London rises under smoke and steel, and Victoria, in her black robes, remains its steadfast witness, its measured heart, and its guiding hand. Even as London grows louder, brighter, and more restless with the hum of industry, Victoria retreats further into shadow. The city, vast and sprawling, pulses with the energy of railways, factories, and the constant demands of empire, yet she finds herself increasingly detached from its immediate rhythms. Balmoral and Windsor become her sanctuaries, spaces where the world can approach only on her terms, where letters and dispatches arrive in manageable quantities, filtered by secretaries, and where the cold Scottish air sharpens her mind while the Highlands soothe her heart. Her public appearances have become rare, meticulously curated performances rather than daily obligations. The Queen appears at ceremonies and openings, yet her smiles are measured, her words deliberate, every gesture calculated. The courtiers who once crowded her chambers now see her as almost spectral, a figure who commands authority without presence, a sovereign whose power seems to emanate from absence as much as from action. They whisper among themselves, remarking on her diligence, her prudence, and the enigmatic weight she carries. Yet even these murmurs cannot penetrate the quiet fortress of her inner life. Victoria spends her mornings reading reports from across the empire. Trade, administration, colonial disputes, military engagements, and the occasional crisis in far-flung territories. Each letter, each telegram, is a thread connecting her to a world she can see only in fragments. Her eyes scan for nuance, for subtle signs of loyalty or dissent, for the currents beneath the surface of printed words. She responds not with the flourish of the stage, but with the careful precision of a woman who understands that decisions made at her desk ripple across oceans and mountains, affecting lives she may never witness. At night, the palace grows still, the long shadows stretching across the polished floors as the firelight flickers and dies. Victoria walks through the corridors alone, her skirts whispering against the stone, her mind alive with the calculations of state, the memories of loss, and the faint ache of solitude. She stops occasionally before portraits, Albert, their children, ancestors, and lets her gaze linger, recalling both warmth and guidance, love and discipline. In these moments, she confronts the contradiction that defines her reign, the queen who embodies the empire yet remains apart from it, the woman whose grief has shaped an age and whose absence has deepened her authority. Her letters to her children continue, though more frequently now she writes not only of propriety and duty, but of observation and counsel. They live scattered across Europe, married into foreign courts, yet through her correspondence she maintains influence, guiding them with the same meticulous care she applied to governance. To them, she is mother. To her ministers and subjects, she is sovereign. She inhabits both roles simultaneously, never fully one or the other, and the tension of that duality shapes her every choice. Even in shadow, she is conscious of her image. Portraits, engravings, and photographs are controlled with precision, each one reinforcing the Queen's authority, her constancy, and her devotion. Black gowns, veils, and jet ornaments speak of her mourning, but also of her resilience. Her visage is familiar across continents, recognized in India, Australia, Canada, and Africa. She has become the embodiment of the empire itself, immovable, solemn, enduring, and impossibly present, even when physically absent. Yet beneath the public face lies the private self, the woman who remembers Albert in every quiet corner, who mourns the children she cannot always protect, who paces the halls with the weight of an empire pressing against her shoulders. The shadows she inhabits are not merely physical, they are temporal, emotional, and political. They are where she reconciles loss with duty, grief with power, and memory with the relentless demands of sovereignty. In these quiet hours, Victoria realizes that shadow is not absence. It is presence in its most disciplined form. It is vigilance, reflection, and authority distilled into silence. It is the quiet heartbeat of an empire that never stops, and it is the force that defines her. The Queen in shadow governs not only lands and subjects, but history itself, her invisible hand shaping the age from the recesses of her own solitude. 1877 arrives with a sense of inevitability and grandeur. London is festooned with banners and flags, its streets alive with a rhythm that pulses from the city to Westminster. The air smells of coal, rose gardens, and the faint tang of seawater carried upriver from the Thames. The city is alive with expectation, for this is the year of Victoria's Golden Jubilee, 50 years upon the throne. Half a century of rule, grief, devotion, triumph, and relentless duty is to be celebrated, and the empire has mobilized itself to mark the occasion with spectacle and ceremony unlike any before it. Victoria awakens that morning in Windsor Castle, her chambers shadowed by the familiar black drapes, the same curtains that have defined her life since Albert's death. Yet there is electricity in the air, a sense that even in mourning, time has brought her to a pinnacle. She dresses carefully, her black gown adorned with jewels collected from across the empire, diamonds from India, pearls from the oceans beyond Australia, rubies from Africa. Each gem is a story, a territory, a people she governs. When the Queen steps into the carriage, it glimmers with the polish of ceremonial preparation, her visage framed against the morning sun like an icon, both eternal and human. The streets are crowded, hundreds of thousands line the mall and beyond, waving flags, raising hands, shouting her name. Children perched atop shoulders call out, "God save the Queen." Bells toll in rhythm with the passing carriages, and cannon fire from the Tower of London punctuates the morning. She acknowledges the crowds with the same measured gestures that have become her signature. A slow lift of the hand, a faint inclination of the head, the smallest of smiles reserved for those who have waited decades to witness her presence. For many, she is no longer merely a woman, but the embodiment of continuity, the anchor of an empire that has weathered wars, revolts, industrial upheaval, and the relentless march of progress. Throughout the day, Victoria attends ceremonies, receptions, and banquets, each arranged with meticulous care. Foreign dignitaries arrive in splendid uniforms, colonial governors and generals bow, and ministers carry out the choreographed rituals of governance and diplomacy. Yet beneath the pageantry, the Queen carries the weight of half a century, not only the triumphs, but the shadows of grief, loss, and sacrifice. She remembers Albert, her children, and the millions whose lives are touched by her decisions, both near and distant. Even amidst jubilation, she feels the constant pulse of responsibility. As the sun sets, she moves to the balcony of Buckingham Palace for the final address. The crowd stretches into the fading light like a living river. Her voice, though worn by decades of expectation, carries clearly. She thanks her people, honors her family, and reflects upon the empire she has guided through triumph and trial. And though she does not speak of her private sorrow, it is present in the quiet dignity with which she receives their cheers. At night, in the solitude of her chambers, Victoria writes in her diary, 50 years have passed, half a century of rule, love, and loss. The empire stands, vast and unbroken, and I have walked through it as its witness. And yet, I am still alone in the shadow of what has shaped me. The Jubilee cements her place not only as monarch, but as symbol. 50 years of mourning, governance, and devotion converge into a singular image: Victoria, Queen of the Empire, unyielding and enduring. Outside, the city rests under the glow of lanterns and torchlight, but within, she feels the pulse of history itself, steady and eternal, as if the heartbeat of an entire age courses beneath her ribs. The Golden Jubilee is more than celebration. It is the affirmation of a reign defined not by conquest alone, but by resilience, constancy, and the quiet persistence of a sovereign who, even in shadow, shapes the world. By 1880, Victoria's reign has entered its final decades, and with it comes a transformation of perception. The Queen, who once moved with the vitality of youth, now carries herself with the weight of experience, of grief, and of decades spent at the helm of an empire that stretches across oceans and continents. Black is no longer simply mourning, it has become identity. Every gown, every veil, every jet ornament is a deliberate statement, a vocabulary of loss and power that communicates without words. She is the widow empress, the sovereign whose life is inseparable from the empire she embodies. The halls of Windsor and Balmoral echo with both solitude and ceremony. Courtiers continue to bow, ministers continue to deliver reports, and foreign dignitaries continue to arrive. Yet Victoria moves among them with a quiet detachment, as if observing from a distance, while still holding absolute authority. Even her children, now established across Europe, understand the boundaries imposed by her grief and the duties she cannot relinquish. Letters from Berlin, St. Petersburg, and Florence arrive daily, their tone equal parts filial respect and imperial protocol. Each correspondence is read carefully, annotated, and returned with advice, admonition, or encouragement, bridging the distance between mother, monarch, and symbol of dynastic continuity. The empire itself continues its relentless expansion and transformation. Railways snake across continents, telegraphs carry messages faster than any horse, and colonies thrive or resist under the governance that she oversees from her remote sanctuaries. Dispatches of rebellion, famine, industrial accident, and diplomatic negotiation are delivered with mechanical precision, and Victoria responds with the same meticulous care that has characterized her reign. Each signature, each directive, each handwritten note is an extension of her will, a sovereign presence that stretches across hemispheres, even as her body remains bound by the limits of mortality. Yet even amid governance, Victoria's personal mourning remains as vivid as the day Albert died. She keeps his rooms intact, his belongings untouched. Portraits of him in military uniform, in domestic repose, and in candid sketches stare silently from walls and mantels, a constant reminder of love, loss, and the life she cannot reclaim. She writes to him in her diaries, as though he can read across time, recounting the minutiae of the palace, the events of the empire, and the milestones of her children. These entries are a lifeline, a private dialogue that balances sorrow with the relentless demands of sovereignty. Public appearances, though infrequent, are meticulously orchestrated, Victoria attends openings, ceremonies, and jubilees, her face pale but composed, her black attire contrasting sharply with the gold and crimson of court decorations. Her presence alone is a statement. The monarchy endures, unwavering, dignified, and intertwined with the very identity of the nation and the empire beyond. Even those who whisper about her aloofness cannot deny the power contained within her quiet authority. At Balmoral, the Scottish hills offer solace. She walks the heathered paths alone, listening to the wind and the distant call of stags, contemplating the empire she commands and the life she has lived. The solitude is a refuge, but also a reminder of the human cost of duty. In these moments, she reflects on the balance between governance and grief, power and vulnerability, love and loss. Victoria's final decades are defined by this duality, the public figure who symbolizes imperial authority and stability, and the private woman who carries a personal history of profound love and unending mourning. She is both mother and monarch, widow and empress, shadow and light, and as she continues to guide the empire, vast, sprawling, and unyielding, she does so with the quiet certainty of a woman who understands that her life, her grief, and her endurance are inseparable from the age she has defined. In the quiet of the Highlands, the Queen pauses at a window overlooking the hills, the smoke of distant chimneys curling toward the sky. She places her hand lightly on the glass, as if touching the pulse of her empire itself. "I am here," she whispers, "not for the ministers or the people, but for herself, and for Albert. She is the widow empress. She is Victoria, and she has made her century hers." The year is 1876, and the palace is alive with preparations unlike any seen before. Victoria, still draped in her signature black, sits quietly in her study as ministers and advisors bustle about, arranging ceremonies and dispatches. But this is not a domestic event, nor a European affair. It is the formalization of her title as Empress of India, a coronation that stretches her authority across continents, oceans, and cultures. For decades, she has been Queen of the United Kingdom, sovereign of distant lands through the machinery of administration and colonial oversight. Now, her rule is symbolically, unmistakably global. The news arrives first in telegrams and letters, Indian princes pledging allegiance, colonial governors submitting reports. The people of India, some loyal, some wary, acknowledging her sovereignty. The East India Company has been dissolved, its private dominions ceded to the crown after the rebellions of the 1850s, exposed both the fragility and the necessity of direct governance. The empire's jewel, India, is now under Victoria herself, a tangible embodiment of authority and moral responsibility. She studies the reports with quiet intensity, the weight of the title settling like a crown upon her shoulders even before it is formally conferred. Albert is gone, yet she feels his influence in every decision. His vision of governance, of moral responsibility accompanying power, guides her hand as she prepares for the proclamation. India, she knows, is not a simple possession. Its diversity is vast languages, religions, cultures, and histories, layered upon one another in a complex lattice. She must navigate this reality carefully, balancing tradition with the reach of imperial law, ceremony with practical governance, loyalty with diplomacy. Her advisors, trained in administration, debate endlessly about ritual and protocol. But Victoria listens, weighs, and decides with the clarity of a monarch who has learned that influence is as much symbolic as it is structural. When the proclamation is finally announced, the ceremony is both grand and delicate. Crowds gather in London and throughout India, where news of the Empress's new title spreads through colonial cities and princely states. In London, dignitaries from across Europe attend, presenting gifts and observing protocol. The Queen wears her black gown, adorned with the subtle sparkle of jewels from the subcontinent, diamonds, sapphires, and pearls. Each gem is a silent testament to the lands over which her authority now extends. The words Empress of India resonate in every hall, echoing across continents, carrying weight both symbolic and concrete. Letters follow, not from ministers but from Indian princes, viceroys, and governors. Some are formal, filled with praise and ceremonial language. Others are personal, expressing gratitude, caution, or subtle counsel. Victoria reads each with equal care, aware that her responsibility is vast, her influence immediate, and her actions irreversible. Even from the quiet of Balmoral or Windsor, she governs with the same intensity that once guided her in Kensington's corridors as a young girl. Yet beneath the grandeur, she feels the weight of the title. Empress is not merely honor, it is vigilance, responsibility, and, at times, isolation. She contemplates the fires of the rebellion past, the lives lost, and the fragile loyalty she must maintain. Her mourning, her discipline, her careful management of family and empire all converge into this moment. She is more than queen. She is a symbol, a mother to millions, a sovereign whose reach now spans half the globe. In the quiet hours after the proclamation, she walks through Windsor's corridors, past portraits of Albert and the children, past the windows framing the Scottish hills. Outside, the wind whispers across the moors, and she places her hand lightly on the glass, imagining the empire she now formally governs. She whispers, almost to herself, "I am their queen, and I am their empress, and I will carry this responsibility as I have carried all else with duty, with care, and with unwavering devotion." Victoria, widow and empress, knows that her age has truly become hers, and that the world will never see a monarch like her again. As the calendar turns to 1881, Victoria senses the weight of a century pressing close, the air thick with change and promise. The world she governs is no longer bound by horse-drawn carriages, gaslight, or the slow diplomacy of old Europe. Steam engines roar across continents, telegraphs carry messages in seconds, and inventions ripple through the empire like sudden storms. Electricity glimmers on the horizon, and London, the heart of her dominion, hums with anticipation of the innovations yet to come. The Queen observes it all from her high windows at Buckingham Palace. The streets below are a river of movement factories belching smoke, trains cutting ribbons of iron through the city, and crowds bustling between markets and railway stations. The empire pulses with energy, yet beneath the noise lies the strain of rapid change. Victoria is acutely aware that progress has its cost. Overcrowding, pollution, child labor, and unrest simmering in distant provinces. Reports arrive daily from India, Africa, and Australia, each dispatch carrying both promise and peril, a reminder that governance is a constant negotiation with forces far larger than herself. Albert is gone, yet she feels his guidance in every decision. His principles of measured reform, of moral responsibility accompanying authority, echo in her counsel and shape her hand. The Queen studies the reports on new railway lines in India and Canada, the telegraph lines spanning continents, and the construction of modern harbours along the coasts of Africa and Australia. She writes annotations in the margins, urging prudence, attention to safety, and sensitivity to the local populations, balancing imperial ambition with the remnants of conscience and compassion Albert once instilled in her. Meanwhile, the palace is alive with the rhythms of domestic duty. Her children, grown and scattered across Europe, correspond regularly. Letters arrive from the Princess Royal in Berlin, from Alice in Hesse, from Beatrice in England, each recounting events of court, family, and duty. Victoria reads them carefully, noting both the achievements and missteps, offering guidance and praise in equal measure. Through correspondence, she maintains a web of influence across the continent, extending her authority beyond Britain's shores and into the courts of Europe. Her children are not only heirs to the throne, but emissaries of her vision, disciplined, moral, and emblematic of the empire she has built in both grief and governance. public life continues its quiet intrusion. Ministers, diplomats, and visiting dignitaries seek her approval and counsel. She appears at select ceremonies, her black attire framing the weight of her age and the dignity of her reign. Newspapers comment on her stoicism, her unwavering presence, and her command over an empire that stretches farther than any monarch in history. Londoners, too, see her as a constant, a stabilizing force in an age of rapid, technological, social, and industrial upheaval. Yet even in the applause, Victoria feels the quiet pull of solitude, the same solitude that has shaped her decisions, honed her judgment, and tempered her authority. She walks often in the quiet of Windsor or Balmoral, the Scottish wind carrying hints of frost and pine. The moors remind her of permanence, of a world less chaotic than the cities she governs. It is here, in the stillness, that she contemplates the approaching century, the age of electricity, of railways, of telegraphs, of expanding knowledge and global connectivity. She writes in her journal, "The century is changing faster than we can measure, yet a queen must endure, and so I will, as I have always done, steady amidst the whirlwind." The new century stands at her door, vast and luminous, carrying both the triumphs of empire and the shadows of human cost. Victoria, widow and empress, watches it approach with measured eyes, prepared to guide it with the same discipline, care, and resolve that has defined her reign for over 50 years. She knows that the world will not wait for her grief to ease, it never has, but she also knows that she will meet it, not with fear, but with unwavering authority. The invention of photography has changed the way the world sees its monarch. For decades, Victoria has existed in paintings, engravings, and the ephemeral impressions of public memory. But now, the camera captures her with a precision that is both astonishing and disquieting. In 1883, she consents to sit for what will become one of her final official photographs, an image that crystallizes the weight of her age, her mourning, and her reign. The studio is quiet, heated by gas lamps and the hum of machinery. A photographer, eager yet deferential, adjusts the lenses, checks exposures, and arranges the queen in a chair framed by heavy drapes and polished wood. Victoria sits upright, her black gown flowing to the floor, a delicate veil draped over her face. Her hands, folded in her lap, carry the same steadiness that has guided her across decades of governance, loss, and ceremony. She does not smile. There is no need. The camera does not require warmth or artifice, it records truth. And in truth, she is both sovereign and widow, empress and mother, timeless and mortal. As the photographer directs, she listens quietly, aware of the historical weight pressing into the studio. This is not merely an image, it is a symbol of an age, a record of endurance. The empire will see her, as will posterity. She knows that her features, pale, lined, and marked by sorrow, will be reproduced across continents, in newspapers, postcards, and albums. People in India, Canada, Australia, and Africa will look upon her face and recognize authority, constancy, and the visage of the empire itself. In her private journals, she reflects on the photograph's meaning. "I sit here as a shadow of what I once was," she writes, "and yet I am still the queen. The camera sees nothing of Albert beside me, nothing of the children I cannot hold, yet it will carry my presence farther than I can walk." She understands that the photograph will not capture grief alone. It will also carry the discipline, resolve, and endurance that define her reign. It is both personal and political, intimate and public, a mirror for an empire, and a testament to her life. The day is long. Poses are adjusted repeatedly. Exposures are checked and rechecked. Her attendants move with quiet precision, readying her for each sequence, smoothing the folds of fabric, adjusting her posture, ensuring that every detail is exact. The Queen's patience, honed over decades, does not waver. She has spent 50 years navigating the weight of ceremony, the expectations of ministers, and the subtle power of presence, and she brings the same meticulous control to the lens. By evening, the photographs are complete. Victoria examines the plates carefully. The likeness is striking, not flattering, but honest. Her eyes, steady and reflective, seem to look past the viewer, beyond the studio, into the vast territories over which she reigns. In them is the trace of grief, yes, but also the determination that has sustained an empire, the resolve that has moulded an age. Outside, the Scottish wind whips against the palace walls. Inside, the Queen sits quietly, contemplating her reflection in a mirror beside the camera. She is aware that these images, captured in a single moment, will outlast her, becoming part of the public memory and the empire's history. She writes once more in her diary, "Though my body grows older and my companions have passed, my reign is witnessed. Time may continue, but these eyes will endure in the minds of my people." The last photograph is more than a likeness. It is a testament to grief and endurance, to authority and devotion, to the life of a woman who has become an age itself. Victoria rises from the chair, her shadow long in the studio's dim light, and for a moment, she feels the presence of both her past and her empire. The camera has captured not just a queen, but a witness to history, steadfast and resolute, poised forever at the intersection of duty and mortality. The winter of 1884 arrives like a whispered warning, its cold seeping through the thick stone walls of Windsor Castle and across the heathered hills of Balmoral. The Thames winds beneath a pale sun, half hidden by frost and mist, while the city of London shivers beneath smoke and fog. For Victoria, this Christmas carries the weight of decades, the joys of tradition tempered by the ever-present shadow of loss, and the responsibilities of an empire that never pauses for celebration. The Queen wakes early, her black gown already prepared for the day, the familiar crepe and jet a shield against the public eye and private sorrow alike. The palace is quiet, servants moving with measured efficiency, preparing feasts and decorations, yet mindful that their sovereign's mourning will not be disturbed by frivolity. She moves through the halls with the precision of decades, greeting those who are required to be present, and acknowledging them with a measured hand and subtle nod. There is no warmth in the display, only the quiet dignity of one who carries not just grief, but the weight of a nation. Albert is absent, of course, but his presence is felt in every corner. The piano he once played remains, the firewood stacked as he arranged it, the study untouched save for the letters that chronicle both family and empire. Victoria lingers here before the day's ceremonies, her fingers brushing over the edge of his desk, the pen he used to write in ink now dry, the papers still perfectly aligned. She writes in her own journal, recounting the morning's routines, the sounds of servants, the distant bells of London marking the hour. Her script is precise, yet beneath it lies the tremor of longing, a quiet testament to a love that endures beyond death. The royal family gathers for the morning service, the children now grown, their children arriving as well, forming a bridge between past and future. Victoria observes them carefully, noting the lines of propriety, the gestures of reverence, and the fleeting glimpses of tenderness between mother and child. She smiles rarely, and only to convey approval rather than affection. Yet there is pride in her gaze. These descendants are the living embodiment of her reign, the heirs of duty and empire she has spent her life shaping. After the service, the palace fills with music, carols performed with skill and restraint. The Queen listens from her chair, the sound both comforting and melancholy. Each note carries memories. Albert at the organ, the children learning songs under his watchful eye, laughter that once echoed through the halls and now exists only in recollection. She allows herself a single moment of reflection, closing her eyes and letting the music wash over her, before opening them to attend to the formal duties that even Christmas cannot suspend. The afternoon is a blur of ceremonial dinners, speeches, and receptions. Dignitaries offer gifts, their faces polite and calculated. aware that the Queen's attention is both gift and judgment. Victoria receives each offering with the same composed detachment, aware that her role is to embody continuity and stability. The empire observes, and through her, the nation experiences ritualized celebration, one that is less about joy than affirmation of order and hierarchy. As evening falls, the Queen retreats to her private quarters. The fire crackles, casting long shadows across the room. Outside, snow begins to drift lightly over the castle grounds, a quiet veil over the ancient stones. She sits by the window, candlelight illuminating the dark lines of her face, and writes in her journal, "Another Christmas passes, and the world continues. I am surrounded by family, yet alone in memory. Albert is not here, and the silence reminds me that joy and sorrow walk together in this life I govern. Still, I endure, for duty demands it." The final hours of the day pass with stillness. The Queen listens to the wind through the stone eaves, the distant bells tolling midnight. In that quiet, she allows herself a fleeting sense of peace, a momentary truce between grief, duty, and memory. Outside, the empire continues to breathe and move, oblivious to the loneliness within the heart of its empress. Inside, Victoria remains the steadfast widow, the sovereign, and the enduring symbol of an age that has known both light and shadow, joy and unrelenting sorrow. January of 1885 arrives with a cold so sharp it seems to pierce stone. Windsor Castle lies beneath a pall of frost, the smoke from its chimneys curling into the grey sky like fingers of smoke reaching for the heavens. Victoria moves through the halls with deliberate care, her black robes flowing over the polished floors, her hands clasped in front of her. The empire stretches beyond these walls, continents, oceans, cities teeming with life, yet within these stone corridors, time seems to have slowed, honoring the weight of one life that has defined an age. Her health, though carefully managed, has begun to decline. The aches of decades, the toll of grief, and the constant weight of responsibility press upon her body as insistently as the crown presses upon her head. Doctors are attentive but cautious, offering remedies that provide only temporary relief. She tolerates them with her customary patience, aware that the empire does not wait for weakness. Ministers continue to send dispatches, letters arrive from her scattered children and grandchildren, and the machinery of governance continues, relentless, oblivious to the fragility of its figurehead. In the quiet mornings, she walks alone through the corridors, past portraits of Albert, their children, and the landscapes of Balmoral, painted to bring the Highlands into the palace walls. She pauses often, touching frames as if to summon the past, remembering decades of joy and sorrow, love and loss. Even as the world outside grows colder, inside she carries a fire, the memory of a husband she loved, a reign she has meticulously sustained, and a vision of an empire she has built from discipline, intelligence, and devotion. The empire itself continues, indifferent to the personal rhythms of its sovereign. Railways extend into India and Africa, steamships cross oceans at unprecedented speed, and colonies flourish or rebel with equal intensity. Victoria's signature still appears on treaties, dispatches, and letters, each one a tether connecting her presence to distant lands. Yet she understands, perhaps better than anyone, that her authority is both enduring and ephemeral, lasting only as long as her life and the memory it imprints. On the morning of January 22nd, the Queen rises with effort, moving carefully through her private chambers. The attendants, who have long anticipated the inevitable, prepare the rooms with quiet reverence, candles flickering in brass sconces, curtains drawn to soften the cold light. Victoria sits by the window for a final moment, gazing across the frost-strewn gardens of Windsor. The sky is pale, the wind soft against the stone, and for a moment the world feels suspended, still, quiet, as if holding its breath. When she finally lies down, the chambers are filled with a hushed solemnity. The servants move as if treading upon sacred ground. Ministers and aides await news, but they understand that this moment is beyond urgency, beyond ceremony. Her children, scattered across Europe, receive word immediately, traveling as quickly as possible to be near her in her final hours. Yet even distance cannot diminish the weight of her presence. Her life has shaped the world, and her death will mark a turning point as profound as any proclamation or treaty she has signed. Victoria breathes slowly, each inhalation deliberate, each exhalation measured. Her mind drifts over half a century of life. Coronation, marriage, children, empire, grief, progress, and perseverance. She thinks of Albert, of the children she has raised, of the people she has ruled and represented, and of the century that has unfolded beneath her steady gaze. Outside, London waits, oblivious to the intimate stillness that has descended upon its sovereign. When her final breath leaves her, the palace is silent but for the subtle echo of life continuing beyond its walls. A chapter ends not with fanfare, but with the quiet conclusion of a reign that has lasted over 63 years, the longest in British history to that point, and one that has defined not only a nation, but an era. Victoria is gone, yet the shadow of her life stretches across continents, a testament to the woman who became her age. The empire mourns, and history begins to remember. When Victoria dies, the world does not stop. London hums with its usual mix of coal smoke, horse hooves, and the distant cries of street vendors. Parliament convenes as always, ships sail into ports, trains whistle along tracks, and the machinery of empire continues to turn. Yet, in the hearts of those who loved and served her, and in the empty corridors of Windsor and Balmoral, a silence falls deep, heavy, almost tangible. It is a silence that carries the echo of half a century, the weight of a reign that has endured wars, revolts, industry, and grief. The corridors of Buckingham Palace, once bustling with courtiers and officials, now seem cavernous. The black drapes that Victoria wore for decades remain, ghostly reminders of a woman who governed through mourning, devotion, and discipline. Her rooms are untouched, Albert's study preserved, her journals carefully stacked, her gowns folded as she left them. Every object, every corner, bears the imprint of her presence, a witness to her relentless attention to detail, her devotion to duty, and her enduring love for the husband she never ceased to mourn. Outside the palace, the public reacts with awe, reverence, and grief. Newspapers print eulogies that stretch across pages, chronicling the life of a queen who became an age itself. Crowds gather in streets once lined for jubilees, now silent with the weight of absence. Men and women, young and old, whisper her name as they walk along the Thames, across squares, and through marketplaces. In every city, town, and colony of the empire, flags fly at half-mast. The nation collectively exhales, mourning a sovereign whose shadow has loomed over generations. Victoria's children and grandchildren arrive from across Europe, their faces drawn with sorrow and the realization that a mother, guide, and symbol is gone. They move through her chambers slowly, reverently, touching desks, chairs, and books, as if each gesture might summon her spirit back. In their letters and diaries, they write not only of personal grief, but of the responsibility now resting upon their shoulders, the weight of continuing a legacy forged through devotion, discipline, and the careful blending of authority and morality. The empire, too, senses a shift. Administrators and governors take stock of the work that has been done, the structures she put in place, and the vast web of influence she maintained across continents. Even in death, Victoria's presence is felt. Her policies guide decision-making, her correspondence instructs administrators, and her precedents shape the very identity of governance. She is absent, yet her influence remains a reminder that a reign is more than a person. It is the imprint left on law, culture, and the structures of authority. In the quiet of Balmoral, the highlands echo differently. The wind whistles across the moors, carrying with it the memory of the woman who walked these paths. who paused at the windows to consider the empire, who wrote letters with care, and who shaped the lives of countless people across oceans and continents. The silence here is not emptiness, but reflection, the space where history pauses to honor her, to measure her influence, and to understand the life that has ended, but whose consequences will endure for generations. At night, the candles in her private chambers flicker against the black gowns and polished furniture. The empire continues its inexorable rhythm, trade, administration, innovation, yet in these rooms, in this silence, the Queen's life is honored in stillness. History begins to reckon with her absence, cataloguing triumphs and losses, victories and griefs. And in the quiet, it becomes clear that Victoria's reign was not only measured by time, but by the profound depth of her endurance, devotion, and presence. The silence after the reign is not emptiness. It is the memory of a woman who shaped an age, who held an empire in her hand, and whose influence, though now intangible, will resonate through every law, every institution, and every corner of the world she once governed. The age is over, but the Queen endures, quietly, in shadow, memory, and legacy. The news of Victoria's death spreads across the empire with a weight almost physical. Telegraph lines carry the message to India, Australia, Africa, and Canada. Steamships dock with formal dispatches, and across Europe, ambassadors transmit condolences. The world watches, waits, and prepares for a departure unlike any it has ever witnessed. The funeral of a sovereign whose reign has lasted over 63 years, a widow whose grief and discipline have defined a century, and a queen whose shadow stretched across continents. Windsor Castle becomes the center of ritual. Every corridor, every hall, is swept, polished, and arranged for ceremony. Black drapes hang in heavy folds, their edges embroidered with gold trim, symbols of authority and mourning interwoven. Servants move with quiet reverence, adjusting candlesticks, straightening upholstery, and ensuring that every gesture is exact. Courtiers, ministers, and dignitaries file in with solemn precision, their expressions carefully restrained, their eyes reflecting the weight of history. The body of the Queen lies in state, draped in the black that has become synonymous with her reign, adorned with the insignias of empire she has carried for decades. London streets are crowded, filled with tens of thousands who have come to witness the last passage of their Queen. Men remove their hats. Women bow their heads. The air is heavy with coal smoke, candlelight, and a faint scent of evergreen. Bells toll slowly, in measured rhythm, echoing across the city like the heartbeat of the empire itself. From Westminster to the Tower, the sound carries, solemn and steady, a reminder of a woman who has shaped not just a nation, but the lives of millions across the globe. The procession begins. Carriages carrying ministers, foreign dignitaries, and family members follow the hearse, draped in black, its wheels heavy with the weight of history. Soldiers march alongside, their uniforms immaculate, their rifles resting against, shoulders like silent witnesses. Crowds line the streets, silent, apart from the occasional muffled cry or whispered prayer. Flags fly at half-mast, banners droop in the winter wind. The ceremony is grand, yet restrained, befitting a queen who ruled with dignity, discretion, and enduring restraint. Inside the abbey, the ceremony continues with solemn precision. The service blends religious rites, military honors, and personal tributes. The archbishop reads prayers aloud, invoking both divine guidance and the legacy of the monarch. Music fills the space organ notes that resonate like a distant echo of past jubilees, the voices of choirs harmonizing in mourning. Victoria's children and grandchildren sit in rigid rows, their faces pale but composed, aware that they carry not only grief but responsibility. Her legacy now passes, tangibly, to the next generation. Outside, the empire continues to observe. In India, Canada, and Australia, flags are lowered, public buildings close, their doors in respect. Communities gather in town squares, watching as news travels through newspapers, telegrams, and letters. They mourn a sovereign who was both distant and intimately present, a ruler whose decisions touched even those she never met, whose discipline and dedication shaped lives in ways the public could scarcely measure. By nightfall, the funeral concludes. The body is lowered into the tomb, surrounded by generations of her family, ministers, and the remnants of an empire she has molded. Candles flicker against stone walls, casting long shadows, while outside, London breathes again, subdued but enduring. The world has witnessed the passing of a queen whose life and reign were inseparable, whose grief and governance intertwined to define an age. Victoria's funeral is more than a ceremony. It is the closing of a chapter for an entire civilization. The empire mourns not only the woman, but the era she commanded, the shadows she cast, and the legacy that will shape generations to come. The day ends in silence, heavy, measured, and unforgettable, the funeral of a world, of a life, and of an age that will never be replicated. When the funeral of Victoria concludes and the echoes of bells fade into the London fog, the empire she shaped continues its relentless rhythm, carrying forward the imprint of her reign. Streets bustle once more, factories hum, and ships sail to the corners of the globe. The crown has changed hands, yet the world she guided, the laws she enforced, the structures she reinforced, the culture she cultivated bears her unmistakable mark. The age of Victoria, like her shadow, stretches far beyond the limits of her body, enduring in systems, symbols, and memory. In London, government offices and ministries operate under the precedents she established. Decisions are still informed by the meticulous correspondence she maintained, the policies she approved, and the moral framework she imposed. Ministers who served under her decades-long rule continue to consult her journals and directives, applying the Queen's standards to new challenges. Even her absence does not diminish her authority. Her influence is embedded in the very mechanics of governance, a quiet hand guiding the empire from beyond the grave. The colonies feel her presence as well. Governors in India, Australia, and Canada carry out policies she endorsed. Legislation she commissioned continues to shape education, infrastructure, and trade. Her emphasis on morality, duty, and discipline, as well as her insistence on ceremonial observance, defines the expectations of leadership across the empire. Local populations, though often distant from her physical presence, live under the systems she shaped, from railway networks to administrative hierarchies, from public schools to hospitals. Her reach is vast, both tangible and symbolic, binding disparate territories into a coherent, if imperfect, whole. Culturally, Victoria's impact endures. Portraits and photographs of her line walls and halls of palaces, public buildings, and private homes. Literature, theatre, and periodicals reference her reign, her persona, and her principles. She is remembered not only as a monarch, but as an icon, a symbol of stability in an age of industrial expansion, political reform, and social unrest. Even the next generation of rulers finds their authority measured against her legacy, their choices constrained and guided by the framework she leaves behind. Yet the age of Victoria is not merely institutional, it is human. The generations who grew up under her reign, who were raised by her policies or educated in schools she supported, carry her influence in their habits, their expectations, and their understanding of duty. Her children, now dispersed across European courts, continue to act as extensions of her vision, embodying the discipline, moral rigor, and careful governance she instilled. Through them, her personal and political philosophy continues to shape the world long after her passing. In quiet moments, historians and chroniclers reflect upon the era she defined. They note the contradictions, progress shadowed by inequality, industrial expansion paired with social struggle, moral authority imposed alongside personal grief, but they cannot deny the cohesion she achieved, the continuity she maintained, and the profound depth of her influence. The empire may evolve, adapt, and even falter, But the structures she created and the principles she embodied endure as a foundation for the modern world. In the Highlands, where her memory lingers in the halls of Balmoral and the winds sweep across the moors, one can almost feel her presence, the echo of footsteps, the faint outline of a black gown, the quiet authority of a woman who ruled not only through power, but through discipline, devotion, and enduring purpose. The age of Victoria remains, carried forward by the institutions, people, and symbols she shaped. The Queen may be gone, but the empire she left behind, its laws, its culture, its people, and its ideals continues to breathe with the life she bestowed. Her era is over, but its pulse, like her shadow, endures. Even after her death, Victoria lingers not in the flesh, but in the consciousness of the empire she ruled and the people she shaped. Her presence is woven into the architecture of governance, the etiquette of courts, and the expectations of public life. In London, in Bombay, in Melbourne, and across the colonies, her influence is felt in the cadence of ceremonies, the lines of correspondence, and the quiet observances that punctuate civic life. She has become something more than mortal, a ghost of authority, memory, and morality that haunts the empire she once walked. Historians and chroniclers write of her life with a mixture of awe and analysis. They catalogue her achievements, from the expansion of the empire to the reform of social institutions. They describe her as steadfast, austere, and unwavering, a woman who transformed mourning into identity and duty into legend. Yet they also acknowledge the contradictions. A sovereign who governed with both compassion, strictness, whose reforms coexisted with the inequities of industrial and colonial power. In every biography, in every essay, she appears not only as a historical figure, but as a force whose shadow stretches beyond her physical existence. In Buckingham Palace, the corridors remain haunted by her memory. Portraits, photographs, and relics of mourning line the halls, reminding servants and visitors alike that the Queen who once walked these floors continues to exert a silent influence. Her presence is felt in the protocols that survive her, in the speeches that emulate her tone, in the careful observation of tradition that she enforced so meticulously. Even those who never saw her in life speak as though she lingers, guiding the actions of ministers, courtiers, and officials who carry out her legacy. Across the empire, the Queen's ghost is equally tangible. Governors in distant colonies continue to operate under systems she established. Soldiers, teachers, and administrators adhere to rules and procedures she devised or sanctioned. Children are educated in schools built during her reign. Hospitals and charitable institutions bear her name or reflect her standards. Through every law, every institution, and every social convention, her presence is etched into daily life, a reminder of a ruler whose life was inseparable from her duties. Yet her ghost is not solely political. In the hearts of her children and grandchildren, she remains vivid and intimate. Letters, diaries, and private recollections preserve her voice, measured, instructive, sometimes affectionate, sometimes stern. They remember her walking through the rooms at Windsor and Balmoral, the deliberate placement of objects, the cadence of her footsteps, the precise timing of her greetings. Even as decades pass, the family carries her memory forward, shaping their own lives in reflection of hers. Victoria's ghost also lives in the culture of the age she defined. Literature, theatre, art, and popular culture reproduce her image and ideals. The steady monarch, the devoted widow, the moral guide. Citizens wear the marks of her influence in their attire, their observances, their rituals. Her reign, though ended in body, continues to shape thought, behavior, and expectation. In the quiet hours of the night, when gas lamps flicker and snow drifts against the palace windows, one might imagine her presence lingering among the shadows. She walks the halls, her black gown sweeping the floor, her eyes observing, her hand poised as it always was, ready to guide, admonish, or comfort. She is more than memory. She is an enduring force, a ghost whose power and influence will persist long after the century she defined has passed into history. Victoria is gone, yet everywhere she ruled, everywhere she touched, her shadow remains a sovereign in spirit, a queen whose ghost inhabits the empire she built, forever present in the echo of every hall, the cadence of every ceremony, and the pulse of every corner of the world she once governed. The crown that once rested upon Victoria's head is no longer hers to wear, yet its weight lingers in memory, in legacy, and in the empire that stretches across continents. For 63 years, she carried it not only as a symbol of sovereignty, but as a tangible measure of responsibility, devotion, and endurance. Every decision, every signature, every ceremonial gesture pressed upon her with gravity, shaping not only her life but the course of an age. Now that she is gone, the crown exists as an idea, a force, and a reminder of the burdens she bore with unwavering resolve. In the halls of Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle, the crown rests on a velvet cushion, gleaming under subdued light. It is heavy, intricate, adorned with the gems and symbols of empire. But it is no longer only metal and stone, it is history, distilled into a form that conveys authority and memory simultaneously. Courtiers, ministers, and visiting dignitaries observe it with reverence, understanding that this object once rested on the head of a woman whose life intertwined with the pulse of the empire itself. It represents not only governance, ceremony, and hierarchy, but also grief, sacrifice, and the extraordinary weight of decades spent ruling without faltering. Victoria's children and grandchildren, now leaders and consorts in courts across Europe, inherit the implications of that weight. They wear the mantle of dynasty and authority, carrying lessons learned in letters, diaries, and private counsel. Every action they take, every decision they make, is shadowed by the standards their mother imposed, the discipline she exemplified, and the morality she demanded. The crown is no longer hers, yet her influence persists in its symbolism, in the responsibilities it signifies, and in the careful orchestration of power she established across continents. The empire, too, continues under the gravity of her reign. Policies she enacted endure, institutions she reformed maintain their rementa. Structure and the ethical frameworks she championed persist in governance, education, and social systems. Across India, Australia, Africa, and Canada, governors, administrators, and citizens alike operate under the legacy of a ruler whose diligence and foresight shaped the mechanisms of their societies. Victoria's crown, though physically absent, exerts authority through precedent, expectation, and the invisible but unyielding presence of her standards. Culturally, the weight of her crown is felt in art, literature, and public memory. Portraits, photographs, and sculptures reproduce the Queen in her iconic black gown, her solemn expression and composed posture embodying the discipline of her reign. Citizens wear mourning, observe protocol, and emulate virtues she defined. Even popular culture plays, poems, and journals codifies her image as the moral, steadfast, and enduring sovereign, ensuring that the weight of her authority and example continues to shape society long after her passing. And yet, beyond politics and culture, the weight of her crown is personal. It represents the sacrifices Victoria bore in solitude, the grief for Albert, the discipline over her family and household, the diligence across decades of correspondence and judgment. The crown encapsulates the tension between duty and desire, authority and mortality. In the quiet of her rooms, when she once removed it at night, it was never merely an object, it was a reminder of what her life demanded and what she endured for the empire she loved and shaped. As historians and citizens alike reflect upon her reign, it becomes clear that Victoria's true legacy lies not only in the lands she governed, the children she raised, or the policies she enacted, but in the endurance, resolve, and moral rigor she carried for over 6 decades. The crown, now a relic, is a symbol of that endurance. Its weight is heavy, but it is not oppressive. It is testament, honor, and history distilled into gold and jewels. Victoria is gone, yet the weight of her crown remains in institutions, in people, in memory, and in the very shape of the empire she defined. It rests lightly upon the world now, yet its gravity will be felt for generations. The age of Victoria has ended, but its shadow, its authority, and its lessons endure, eternal and unyielding.